Modesty discussion. So what
we're live right now.
Focus conference.
The conference. Yeah. So a girl comes up to me and she said she was in a real toxic relationship with her boyfriend, and her campus minister, I guess one of the Focus missionaries, gave her the soulmate book that we wrote. And she said, yeah, I hadn't even finished the first chapter and I dumped the guy. Like, that's it. And then now she said, I've given away more than 1,000 copies of the book. What? And she said, I do now evangelization with women leaving the sex trade industry and strippers and prostitutes in Naples. I'm like, that's amazing.
She used to be buying stocks in Chastity projects.
So she told me she was working with this girl who's trying to leave the stripping industry, and they ended up covering the topic of modesty. And so she asked her, like, do you think maybe, you might have some outfits in your closet that might be immodest?
She said this to the stripper?
And the stripper's like, not that I can think of. And she's like, really not? Maybe one or two? And she said, you know what? Now you mention it, thongs. Like, I don't need to see your thong. Like, I don't like when people wear those in public. And the woman's like, there we go. We have common ground. So you got to start somewhere.
I think we're such a pornified culture right now.
Yeah.
That what was once considered indecent, it keeps getting moved.
That's Sunday mass attire.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So you've been speaking about chastity for 800 years?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Since medieval times.
You're about to give a talk here at the high school here.
Yeah.
I can't wait to come and listen to your talk.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it's changed over the years.
It has with the culture. I mean, I did 3 of them yesterday in Louisiana, but the kids respond the same. I mean, I remember Steve Jobs who said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And so the kids will come into the assemblies, here we go, stupid sex talk, but then they realize you're not shaming them and blaming them, wagging a finger in their face. They're hungry for it. They're starving for it. I mean, people think I have like the hardest job in the world, like selling teenagers chastity. But I mean, we've done it for 25 years, probably more than 3,000 assemblies, and we've never had a single disrespectful audience once. I remember once we were at a place called the Brown School. It was a school for it's like a correctional facility type place for kids that got kicked out of the public schools and we're in serious disciplinary issue problems. And so I walk in, I'm setting up the podium, the notes and all that stuff before the talk starts. And this boy walks in. It's just him and I in there. And he walks up to me, looks at me, he's like, you're not welcome here. And he starts walking away. And then so I just start laughing. And he spins around. I'm like, come here. And he walks up all tough. And I just pull out $20. I'm like, okay, here's $20. I said, this is not the best sex talk you've ever heard in your life. I want you to come up to me afterwards, and that $20 is yours. Do we have a bet? And he's like, oh, yeah. He's like, I'm coming back. I'm like, I'll see you, And so he walks up, and after the talk, he comes up, and he gives me this big hug, and he's like, man, I owe you $20. And he gives me a hug. And so they're just hungry. I mean, they're just made for the truth.
But, I mean, the idea of, like, is fornication the number one thing today, whereas it may have been what you were talking about a lot. Is that really the issue today?
No. I mean, teen sexual activity rate's been dropping for more than 30 years straight. And people are like, that's great news, but like more abstinence is not necessarily more virtue. I mean, you've got more and more guys that aren't even dating anymore. Like, why would I have to date? I mean, I can just get on Instagram and have hundreds of thousands of disposable supermodels. And then when I'm done with them, I'm done with them. Now, it requires no commitment, no availability. She doesn't have good moods, bad moods. She's just there when I want for what I want her for. And so a lot of the poor girls are like, what the heck? And then the girls get exposed to the pornography younger and younger. And then they declare themselves asexual. Like, wow, if that's what I'm expected to do with a guy, I am an asexual being. And so it isn't that we're seeing necessarily an increase in virtue. I mean, I think the good is getting better, but the bad is also getting worse at the same time. So I'll go to schools where they've got Eucharistic adoration every day of the school week, confessions 3 times a day, lines down the hallway for confession. I was at one high school in Louisiana. It was about like 800 kids. 600 of them were in campus ministry on the campus. I mean, there's some beautiful things going on, but culturally, on a wider lens, I wouldn't say that necessarily things are getting more virtuous just because we're having more kids technically hang on to their virginity.
So when you think of like your chastity talk today, as opposed to say 15 years ago, are you spending a great deal of your time talking about gender confusion and pornography, whereas maybe you would talk about the hookup culture more 10 years ago?
Yeah, definitely more in the pornography, and definitely more pornography in terms of the women that might be struggling with that. Whereas 10 years ago, we didn't even mention that. That's not even on the radar. And it was on the radar in the sense that it was happening, but people just weren't aware of it. And so these girls were kind of in the shadows of thinking like, I'm a freak of nature. I remember Kelsey Skoke saying, a woman came to her and said, like, I don't even sin in a feminine way. Like that, the shame of thinking that lust is an exclusively male issue. And so we've brought that more into the conversation, talking a lot more about starting over. But the big game changer has been the screens. that the availability of stupidity and sin is more accessible now than it ever was. And so the confusion with gender ideology, I address same-sex attractions in the assembly now. We talk outright about homosexuality and the call to chastity there and what that looks like. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, I didn't even know how to address it in an assembly, because it's like, okay, we got an hour. How do I open this can of worms without raising more objections than I could answer? And so the kids that identified in the LGBT community would come up and say, hey, you know, you talked about all that stuff, but you never mentioned us. Like, how does this apply to us? We felt invisible. And I shared with them my struggle of like, I don't know how to bring this up in a soundbite. I mean, it deserves the full hour itself, not 5 minutes of it. And so I said, well, would you pray for me that I would know what to say in my assembly? And the LGBT kids, yeah, we'll pray for you. We'll pray. Thank you. Please do that. And so right after asking their prayers, stories started coming, anecdotes, and it just opened up. And I started bringing that into the assembly. And now we were just at a school down in Dallas, and the teacher said, just so you know, there's some rumblings on campus. There could be a walkout in the middle of your presentation and a protest. And the kids, you know, in the LGBT community are going to like stage a protest and your talk, and we have disciplinarians ready in the hallway and detentions ready to serve. And I said, well, do you mind if I kind of rearrange my talk and I jump right out of the gate and talk about homosexuality first thing? And I don't want to try to defuse this bomb. I'm like, no, I said, I think I can defuse this bomb. And they said, if you think you can. And so right out of the gate, I jumped right into it, and nobody got up and nobody left. And afterwards, those are the kids that lined up for hugs and selfies and conversation. So, so it's had quite an evolution over the last 25 years for sure. But I'd say porn, same-sex attractions is predominantly the new stuff.
Do you know what that is?
That's a bald eagle.
Yeah, the one behind it.
Oh.
Mary McKillop.
From Australia.
Yeah, but do you know where I got that from?
I forget.
You gave it to me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. So when I started working at Catholic Answers back in, when was that? 2012, 2011, I don't know.
Okay.
You had just moved to, I think, Arizona.
Okay.
And you left that in my office. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
But the reason I was thinking about my days at Catholic Answers was I was starting and I was speaking on chastity, and I remember just saying, I'd really like to just talk about pornography. And all the principals were like, oh, no, please don't do that. Mention it, you know. Yeah. I remember going to a school in Canada, and they were very nervous coming up to me. But then over, I'd say, a year or two, it was very interesting to see I couldn't keep up with the speaking requests just on that one topic. Yeah.
So now I don't talk about gender per se in the high school assemblies, because I'm at the same spot of like, how do I weave this in and hop out of that subject in 5 minutes and just move on to the next thing? So we've made it its own talk. And so we're doing that a lot in the parishes and the universities, things like that. We were down at a Louisiana State, and they said, just so you know, we're hearing some rumblings that the Spectrum Alliance is going to come and protest your presentation, perhaps outside with picket signs and this and that. And I said, oh, well, send them an invite. Like, they don't need to stand outside of Louisiana. It's hot. Let them in. Invite them. Tell them, hey, come on in, and we'll do dinner afterwards, or I'll be available to listen to you as long as you want to listen to me. Like, let's bring them into this conversation instead of this back and forth. And they said, okay, well, let me make sure the reports are credible. This protest is going to happen, because they said if it's not going to happen, we'd rather kind of just fly under the radar. And they were able to just do the talk and no protest happened. But, you know, my response was like, no, we don't need to have this bicker back and forth. Like, welcome them in, you know, and say, I will listen to you. You know, I'm not just going to hear to just bark at you and debate you. You know, I'd like to hear where you're coming from on this. And so that's the approach we're trying to take with this.
Have you not had people stand up at any of your presentations and chant at you and try to shout you down? On occasion, you know. I remember it happened in Australia once at a bar. I was doing the talk green sex on contraception, and some slightly inebriated Aussies came up, but thankfully we had some rugby guys that were already set up to be the bouncers that kindly escorted those gentlemen from the premises. But it really doesn't happen as often as I'd think. I mean, you see these YouTube clips of people speaking at university campuses, and it's just bonkers, but it hasn't happened yet. I mean, I was invited to speak over in Ireland, and people started sending death threats of like, we will boil you in a cauldron if you come here. They started protesting, like, the university, you cannot have him on our campus. And the University of Dublin pulled out, and then the hotel I was supposed to speak at pulled out. High school started pulling out, and, you know, it was a big mess. So yeah, I mean, but a lot of those battles are fought before I come. Did you ever go back to Ireland? No, we still want to do it. We want to book it. It wasn't canceled because of that. I was getting ready to leave the house like 3:00 in the morning for the flight, and we already had like 5 kids sick. And then I walked down the hallway
hallway, and my daughter just finished throwing up. She's sick, and then Crystal's sick, and before I know it, the entire family. And it's like one of those moments you hate as a speaker. It's like, okay, do I now have to call that bishop and the girl who worked all year to fight all these battles to bring me in and tell them, I'm sorry, I can't come? Or do I leave my family to stand on a stage to talk about love while all are home throwing up by themselves? It's like, you know, and it was one where I had to bite the bullet and say, you know, vocation before occupation. And it was really hard.
I bet.
Because then like the LGBT community over there, like, Victory, we did it. We canceled his talk. See, you know, it shows how diverse we really are and inclusive that we were able to exclude him. So they celebrated as a victory, but it really had nothing to do with those protests, because where they dropped out, other schools jumped in and said, we'll do it.
So how does your approach differ to, say, Matt Walsh? Because when Matt and those fellows get up and they speak about transgenderism, they often do have people shouting at them.
Yeah.
And they can be pretty vitriolic back to them. And I kind of like it. I kind of like that. I kind of like that kind of hard-edged approach.
Yeah.
I think a distinction needs to be made, and maybe you can tell me why I'm wrong to like that. But I think a distinction obviously has to be made between the ideology that's being pushed by people who ought to know better and those who are suffering.
Yeah.
Like, I can get up and talk about pornography and shame it and show what a pathetic act it is. But if someone's in front of me and they struggle with pornography, I'm gonna love them and listen to them and empathize with them.
Yeah.
So is there room for both approaches? How does your approach differ to Matt Walsh's?
I mean, if someone is going to stand up in the middle of my gender talk and start screaming at me, I think I'd yell back and say, you know, hey, I got one thing to say to you. Like, can I buy you a beer tonight? Like, can we go have dinner after this? Like, let's talk. I want to listen.
Yeah, it's definitely different to Matt Walsh's.
Because, you know, if they don't think that you're willing to listen to them, then it's just like you're just shouting past each other. But I think you make a really good point that there's a really big difference between gender theory and gender dysphoria. And as a church, a lot of people haven't realized that yet. It's like, no, this is an infernal ideology that needs to be disproven. And, you know, we need to pull out the apologetic guns and show them why the anthropology is off and why puberty blockers are harmful and cross-sex hormones are not the way to go. And the suicide rate after surgery, fact after fact after fact after fact. And it's like, okay, like, we've got to address gender theory. You know, it needs to be firmly, you know, shown why it's a deficient understanding of man. But if we think that that's all that we need to do, we're missing, like, this isn't just an ideology. These are individuals, you know, that are wrestling with gender dysphoria in a crippling way psychologically, that it's a tremendous amount of suffering. And I think I've spent so much time kind of in the trenches with these teens that I can see it from both perspectives. I remember years ago, I was up in Canada, and Dad came up to me with his son. And the son wanted to go through some transition surgeries and, you know, have a penectomy and, you know, have his penis removed and all this stuff and castration. And, you know, I'm talking to the boy. Then I spent some time talking to the dad, talking to both of them. And afterwards, the dad was saying to me, you know, I said, I think I'm just going to let the kid have the surgery. And that way, when he regrets it, that can be his punishment. Oh. And I'm like, you wouldn't even let a doctor cut off his pinky. You know, but you'll let him do this, and that can be his punishment. And having so many of these conversations with these kids, I remember speaking at a high school in Dallas, and a boy came up and he said, you know, I'm trans, and we sat down. It was at the school where that big protest was going to happen, and didn't. And we just sat in the guidance department office, and we just talked for a long time. Tell me about your family. And he said, well, I've got, you know, 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters, and you know what? He's like, they can do no wrong. You know, they're just doted on and fawned over by my parents, but me, I can't ever be good enough. You know, I'm on mixed martial arts. I'm on the swim team. I do jujitsu. I always got straight A's, but I'm the black sheep of the family. And my parents are never satisfied. And I just jumped in and I said, well, do you think if you were born a girl, you would have been loved the way your sisters are loved? And he said, I know I would have been. And to me, it's like, here we go. Like, now we're getting really to the core. Your ache is not to be a woman. Your ache is to be loved. And womanhood is the channel to find that love. And so when you really start to listen to the dysphoria with kind of a reverent curiosity, that's our ministry, is we want to help them to listen to the dysphoria, not for the sake of just blindly obeying it into transition, but to what's the story underneath it? What's the ache? And sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not, but it's a story worth listening to.
Yeah, gee, that's beautiful. I say this in all seriousness, like there's not a bad chance that we'll either get a strike or ban from YouTube for a conversation like this.
Yeah.
That's not me being hyperbolic. As soon as you start talking about gender dysphoria in the realm of, I'm not even going to say it, that's a good reason to get your channel canceled. So 2 things I want to invite people to do. Follow us on Locals. You don't even have to be a supporter on Locals. We put out a lot of content. It's kind of like Twitter. You have to subscribe to Twitter or sign up to Twitter in order to see what people are posting. You can also throw a few bucks our way if you want, but you don't have to do that. If we ever did get banned from here, we would start posting videos over there that would be public on that platform. mattfradd.locals.com, link in the description. And then also we're over on Rumble. And so,
yeah, no, it's worth doing. But I mean, our Facebook page, I mean, the gender book just came out just in the last several weeks, and the Facebook page just got hacked, and our entire Facebook page, 125,000 followers, deleted. And they were able to find out where it came from, and the hack came from like Pakistan, India, and Germany. And I'm like, I knew it's the German Conference of Bishops. They're at it again. Yeah, no, I mean, we've got to diversify the portfolio of our social media offerings because none of them are guaranteed.
My fear is that if we allow YouTube to silence us out of fear, and we use the excuse, hey, I want to be able to reach as many people as possible, and therefore I'm going to curtail what I talk about and be very specific. There's something to be said about prudence, being wise as serpents, gentle as doves. Yeah. But if YouTube has become the kind of town square where ideas are shared, and that's the primary place that they're being shared, if we shut up about this, then people are just children being evangelized, as it were, by Disney and
de-evangelized.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think if you're afraid to speak the truth because you'll lose your platform, then it's the platform that you love, not the people that you claim to love.
That's a very good line, Jason Everett. We should point out that you have a new book out, and I'm going to ask Thursday to put this in the description. It's called Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender, and it can be had at
chastity.com.
Chastity.com. If you can just put a link in that description. Tell me about this book. I see that half the book is footnotes. Good for you.
There's more than 1,000 of them in there. Well, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and a lot of the books that we've come out with over the years just be like, I just don't feel like there's something out there yet. I mean, there's been some great works on there. I mean, you've got When Harry Became Sally by Ryan Anderson, fantastic work. More
Canceled
from a public,
by Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. But more from a public policy perspective. You've got Abigail Schreier's got a good book called Irreversible Damage. It's excellent, not from a Christian perspective, but I felt like I wanted to have something that could answer kind of the top claims being made by gender theory, while at the same time kind of setting the pastoral tone for how do we address these things. And I want this to be received when I give the talks. Sometimes I'll have a kid sit in the front row, 15-year-old girl, short, cropped, haircut, blue, hair, piercings, gender non-conforming clothes, sitting there forced to be there by her mom next to her. And she's sitting there right in the front row during my gender talk. And, the whole talk, I'm just thinking, how is this landing on her heart? And so every page of that, I want it to be received so that a college kid could use it in a gender studies class and go toe to toe with the professor on that stuff. A mom could use it to know, okay, how do I understand what all these non-binary trans, what the heck does all this mean? It could be used in seminaries or for a person wrestling with gender dysphoria. So I figured, okay, I'm going to read 10 or 15 books on gender. I'll have a good idea on it. And then I'm gonna write the books. I've got enough pastoral experience. Got through 10 books. I'm like, oh, wow. Like I need to read 5 more in endocrinology, 5 more in public policy, 5 more on feminism, 5 more on pediatric medicine, 5 more. And it was just like this rabbit hole I went down. And like 20,000 pages later of research, I felt like, okay, I feel like I'm finally starting to get a grasp of the big issue, because it's the topic of man, which is so broad, from, the psychology, from the chromosomes, from all this. And you can't have a deficiency in any of these areas to really speak competently on it. And so I just dove in for 2 years of research, and then I sent it off to all the experts. People, Abigail Favale, read through it. I had, Ryan Anderson and Mary Rice Hassan, philosophers, theologians, Dr. Paul Roos, endocrinologist, a couple of psychologists read through it. Most importantly, I sent it to 2 Catholics who identify as trans. And I said, could you read this? And I want to know what you think. And I want to know how can I nuance this more effectively, and where am I misrepresenting certain parts of the position, and send them off. And, one guy in particular, married guy, military guy, externally very machismo, wrestled with gender dysphoria his whole life, married with kids, but really struggling with his gendered identity. And he sent back pages and pages of helpful critiques and red lines, and then sent it to another person who's full-blown identifying as trans, and got some input there as well, and was able to integrate those things without compromising the church's teachings. And so that's the idea. It's kind of a flyover of the top objections of gender theory, whether it's the puberty blockers and the medical stuff, or whether the psychology behind it and rapid onset gender dysphoria, and then just the personal approach of like, what if I'm wrestling with this? What's God's plan for me?
And so what was something you had to change that you realized that you were ignorant about regarding?
Pretty much everything. I mean, there was so much to it, but just even the finest things, like, I would say, like, sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is something assigned by God at the moment of conception. That's when your sex is defined. an endocrinologist would write back and say, oh, technically that's not precise because of certain hormonal fluctuations that can take place in the weeks coming after conception. The sex can be sometimes determined a few weeks after conception, rather at the very moment of conception. So there are all these little nuances and tweaks or stuff in the chapter where I'd really try to dive into the roots of where is this coming from? Because you look at sociologically and philosophically where this is coming from, and from culture and feminism and Marxism and all this stuff. You can look at it from the medical industry. Where was this coming from in Germany like 100 years ago when they started to do this stuff? But then also psychologically, what are the roots of this? And, a counselor, a doctor of psychology, she went through it, but she treats a lot of patients wrestling with this. And she said, yeah, you really want to nuance that this way, because if they hear that, it's going to, because if you're telling them, if you just get to the roots, then it's all going to make sense. And she said, sometimes the roots don't make sense. And sometimes there isn't a clear answer, because it could be a chromosomal thing that's causing them to have this hormonal imbalance perhaps. And because they have this extra testosterone circulating in their body, they tend to identify with things more masculine. And when they're in a culture that's telling them if you're more tomboyish, then you must be a boy, then it isn't some trauma that they're living out of. It's coming from a hormonal place. And so we don't want to oversell. If you just get to that root, everything's going to go away, because sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it's
that's true in my life and your life as well. It's like sometimes you're going to therapy thinking, well, once I'm healed, then I'll be okay. And sometimes that comes from a form of self-hatred. You have to kind of accept yourself with all of the things that you'll never overcome. You're just going to have to live with forever. I know that's true in my own life. I wish I could say I was healed in this area of my sexuality, but it's not. It's an ongoing struggle. And realizing that, okay, well, then maybe this is the cross I have to carry was actually a liberating thing to think about.
Yeah. And so what I try to get across to the kids is that, if you think of gender stereotypes, they try to get a person to conform their personality to match their body. Like, your body is male, so you got to fit into the male stereotype. Gender theory does the opposite, where it tries to get a person to conform their body to match their personality. So your personality is more feminine, but you have a male body. We must conform the body to match the personality. And so gender theory and gender stereotypes are the opposite sides of the same problem. It's the wrong solution in both directions. And so I think that the answer is to broaden our gender stereotypes. Like, I don't know if you know Sister Deidre Byrne. I had a lunch with her a while back. She's a nun, a religious sister, a doctor, a surgeon, and a colonel in the United States Army. And I'm like, do you just not feel like being an astronaut because you're lazy, sister? Like, you just want all the vocations yourself? But she isn't like doing these things instead of motherhood. She's mothering through these things. And so I try to point out that, like, womanhood isn't a box that you have to fit into. Like, it's a firm foundation that you can stand upon to bloom into whoever God created you to be.
I mean, if my wife was here, she'd tell you stories about when she was at church. She would always have her, shorts on under the floral dress her mother made her wear. Oh yeah. And as soon as mass was over, she'd rip it off and go play soccer with the boys. She was
a wrestler, wasn't she?
She was a wrestler, captain of the wrestling team in high school in Texas. And so she, she says to me that if she grew up in this day and age, who knows what she might have to start believing about herself.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the stereotypes are so overwhelming, especially for the adolescent girls. I mean, just the pressure to be a woman today, insane. Like, you got to be sexy, but you got to be modest, and you got to be skinny, but you got to be healthy, and you should be assertive but submissive, and successful but domestic, and like all of these things. For most girls, it's just overwhelming. They see these glamorous women on social media, then these unsteady girls that they are, and there's like this chasm between those two things, and it's like, I'm not going to get there, so I opt out. And so it's not necessarily that a lot of these girls, that's why non-binary is such a popular title amongst the girls, what they're choosing to go into. It's not that they want to be a guy, they just know they don't want to be a girl. And like, I can't even do that, so I'm opting out of womanhood. And that's why bottom surgery for the girls who transition is less than like 2%. Like, not only is it expensive and painful and often unsuccessful, but there just isn't even the desire to do it. Like, no, I don't want that. Like, I'm not trying to identify as that. I just know I don't fit whatever womanhood is.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So how do you even begin at a solution when you've got a woman in front of you talking like this?
Yeah.
If it's not gender conformity and it's not gender ideology?
Yeah. Well, to me, the answer is really listening more than anything, because I think we're so prone to like, what's the argument you give? What's the thing you say? And to me, it's like, I want her to walk away from that conversation feeling like, that guy really listened to me. Maybe the church has space for me to navigate these questions of my identity. Maybe there's room for me in the church to wrestle through this and not have it all figured out before I come and sit in that pew. I want them to have that sense of like, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I'll walk with you and try to find some with you if you want. Like, I think they want that type of accompaniment rather than just this walking Google who's got all the facts to say to them, because to me, it's the man is a mystery. If there's anything I learned in that book, is man at the end of the day is a mystery. And if we don't approach the subject of the human being with that type of reverence, then we become almost materialists. It's like, no, it's XY or XX and this, and you've got this gonad and that gamete. Therefore, bam, because you have this part and that part, you are a male. It's like, well, wait a minute. It isn't really something that makes me male. It's someone who made me male. It's God gave me my sexual identity as a gift. There's a givenness to it. And if I'm wrestling with that, let's go there. Like, where's this, maybe coming from? Sometimes it's trauma. There's sometimes when a girl's been, for example, sexually abused, she'll dissociate herself as a response to the trauma of like, I know one girl that was molested and her brother was present when the uncle did this, but the uncle didn't touch the boy, he just touched the girl. And what she learned from that is if I had been a boy, I would have been safe. And so there's this pulling back for the sake of security. I remember speaking at a junior high in Dallas, and 7 girls came up afterwards, a little school, 60 kids, 30 of them girls. 7 came up to me after the talk identifying as lesbian, and they're 12 years old. I started talking to them, and they were not erotically attracted to the 8th grade girls. They just thought the 8th grade boys were disgusting, which obviously they are. And so instead of just trying to like shame these girls, I said, you know what? I'm really glad you're not attracted to those boys. I said, you know what? I think I'd be more worried about you if you did think that what those guys were offering you was attractive. And so what I was trying to do there is kind of affirm there's a natural ache to be safe and to find, intimacy in a place where you're not going to be violated. And so your ache at the very core is something good, and it needs to be affirmed instead of shamed. And then maybe if we take that route, you're not just going to stick an L on your forehead for the rest of your life, but realize my revulsion against what is repulsive is natural, healthy, and self-protective, but it's not my identity.
So if man is a mystery, maybe men can be women. What is a man? What is a woman?
Yeah, I read one, it was at Peter Craft, had him on a couple times. He said a mystery is something that we can't know anything about. It's something we can't know everything about. And so when it comes to the question of what is a man, what is a woman, I remember reading a woman, she's not a Christian, but she said, a woman is a person with a female body and any personality, not a female personality and any body. And so the point is that the body is not meaningless, it's meaningful. That our identity is revealed in and through our body. But if we untether our identity from our identity needs to anchor onto something. If not the body, then what? Well, it'll anchor onto the personality. But there are as many personalities as there are persons, and you will end up with an endless spectrum of gender identity. So if we don't wed together gender and sex, those concepts, and they can be thought of as distinct but not divorced. But if we don't reunite those things, what'll happen is that women will basically start to dissociate from womanhood because they can't personify the feminine essence. And then men will start to appropriate womanhood by mimicking female stereotypes. Mm-hmm. And so what's needed is to reunite sex and gender. That's the path forward. And we're going obviously off the rails with this in the other direction, but I think it's gonna come back. I think it's like a tsunami goes out to shore. That's the first sign a tsunami's coming, and our culture's all out to sea with this right now.
Where the hell did this come from?
How much time we got?
We have a lot of time.
Well, the analogy that kind of came to me when I was writing the book is if you think of a flood that's just wiping away villages, you could say, where did this flood come from? It's like, okay, well, let's look where it came from. We've got melted snow caps over here because of the change in the weather. And then let's see, we've got some springs underground that have burst forth. We've had some heavy rainfall. We have a dam that's broken upstream a quarter mile. And all of these things together are causing the tributaries to become swollen. And now it's gone to this main vein of a flood and it's wiping away the villages. And so you could look at it, okay, well, let's look at it from a historical perspective. Where did this come from within the medical field? Let's look at it from philosophically, from Marxism, the role there, and second wave feminism. Let's look at it from a contemporary way of social media and what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria. Let's look at the different origins instead of saying, that's the fault of it. And so you can look at it from a medical perspective. People say, oh, it's the sexual revolution. It's 1960s. Like, no, this was way underway before the 1960s. And when I started to trace it back, people are like, oh, it's Dr. John Money. Okay, where did he get his stuff from? Well, Harry Benjamin. Well, where did he get his stuff from? Well, Magnus Hirschfeld. And you start going back, there was this guy, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was in Berlin, Germany, and he ran this Institute for Sexual Science. This place was creepy. I mean, this guy was really out there. He had a museum of sexual torture devices there. The woman of the house was a man 30 years younger than him that he had sexual relations with, that later committed suicide. And this is the guy that first started doing these sex reassignment surgeries in 1920. Wow. He started with castration of a male.
Oh my.
I think by 22, he gave a double mastectomy to a woman. By 1930, he tried to give a man a false vagina. And so what ended up happening to that man is he died 14 months later after an abyss of suffering. And while all this stuff was going on, there was an American by the name of Dr. Harry Benjamin. And he heard about this Magnus Hirschfeld fellow. And he said, I want you to come out to do a speaking tour in the United States. And so while that patient was dying of this gender reassignment surgery, this guy, Magnus Hirschfeld, was welcomed into America as like the Einstein of sex. And he started this lecture tour. Now, Harry Benjamin became interested in this whole subject by a guy named Alfred Kinsey, who introduced him to a man who identified as transsexual. So Harry Benjamin wanted the surgeries that Magnus Hirschfeld was performing over in Germany to be more accessible in America. Because if you wanted one of these surgeries in America, you had to fly to like Casablanca to a doctor out there who would do these things. And so he said, I want to make these more accessible here. So let's start a research team here. So Dr. Harry Benjamin started this foundation that later became WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. This is now considered kind of the gold standard of the standards of care for transgender individuals today. But this guy, Harry Benjamin, is the one who started this thing. And he said, well, I need to get a research team together. And one of the guys on the research team was Dr. John Money. And so Dr. John Money was working with Harry Benjamin after Magnus Hirschfeld came and did this tour of all his like science experiments he was doing, hailed as the Einstein of sex. And then you've got Dr. John Money coming into the picture. More people are familiar with him because of the good work of Matt Walsh. Dr. John Money, just to set the table for this guy identified as a polyamorous, bisexual nudist who thought that pornography could be helpful to marriage, endorsed pedophilia, and believed that many wives think that it's good when the husband has an incestuous relationship with their children because it relieves her of the burden of needing to be the full sexual outlet for the male and distributes that among the children. This is Dr. John Money. This is the guy we're talking about as kind of the godfather here in the States of this transgender movement. And so he was not a scientist. This guy's a psychologist, and he was fascinated with cases of ambiguous genitalia at birth. And how do we raise these kids, male or female? And they realize it's a lot easier to destroy an incompletely developed penis than it is to construct one. And so they typically would take boys who have ambiguous genitalia and castrate the boys. And then he said, well, maybe we can just raise these as girls. And they started doing these different types of experiments. And then the perfect opportunity came across his path, which was this family, John and Janet Reimer, had a little boy. I think it was 1965. They had twins, Bruce and Brian. And then when the babies were about 8 months old, they suffered something called phimosis, which is a condition where it's very difficult for the kid to urinate. You go to the pediatric doctor and he says, oh, well, you need to give him, a circumcision and that should ease things up. So they schedule the appointment, they go in. And apparently the doctor used a circumcision tool that involved like an electric shock. So what it would do is it would cauterize the wound to keep it from bleeding too much. And apparently there's some big mishap that happened during the cauterization surgery of Bruce's circumcision, and the penis was destroyed. And the parents obviously traumatized. They canceled Brian's surgery, and then his phimosis just resolved on its own. So the whole thing was unnecessary to begin with. And they go home just traumatized with a little 8-month-old boy with a destroyed penis. And they're like, what do we do with this poor boy? And one night they're up watching TV, and they see this Dr. John Money on a TV show just hailing the progress being made at Johns Hopkins Hospital with these new ways that, girls, are identifying as boys and being raised in this way because gender roles. And this is the first time it was ever used in like 1955. He's talking about that stuff in his research papers, that we can raise boys because these are just social constructs.
Gender, when did this word come into play?
Well, the first time we find it in the English language is in the 1400s, exclusively with grammar, that known as masculine, feminine, or neuter. And the 15th century, it started to be used as synonymous with sex, but predominantly it was always in terms of grammar. And so that's the way it always was. In fact, there's no record of it in the medical literature before 1955, when Dr. John Money introduced the term gender roles. And so that's the first place it shows up anywhere on the radar. Today, it's a really problematic word, in my opinion, because it's so extraordinarily vague. I mean, we've got gender reveal parties. Okay, what are we revealing? Biological sex. Okay, but it's a gender reveal party? I thought gender was your internal sense of identity. Like, the meanings can be so different when people have a conversation. It creates a lot of confusion. So it's better to speak of sex and sexual identity than gender, which can have so many different meanings. And so, but he was promoting this idea that gender isn't just distinct from sex, it can be divorced completely from it. And so he thought, this is the perfect match control. I've got a twin set. When this one, we can just castrate the kid. And he talked the parents into that just before Bruce turned 2 years old, was castrated. And he said, look, he's going to be raised a perfectly healthy woman. She won't be able to have kids. She won't be able to have kids, but we're going to put him in dresses and change the name to Brenda, and he will be attracted to males and live a happy married life. And you'll just see, it'll go great. It did not go great. I mean, they gave this little girl, boy, a jump rope. And he said, the only thing I need that for is to tie people up and whip them with it. They gave him a sewing machine, and he took it, he disassembled it to see how the thing worked. He was not interested at all. And growing up in like grade school, the kids teased him like, you're a gorilla. Like, what are you? Because he's in a dress, but he's all guy. And he'd get in fist fights with the other kids. And I mean, the anxiety, the depression, the mother turned to infidelity and alcoholism. I mean, the whole family was imploding. While meanwhile, Dr. Money was seeing the boys every year and molesting the kids and saying, okay, now you need to act out these sexual things, and I'll take pictures because it's important that you learn your gender roles, and like really messed up crap. So by the time the poor boy, Bruce Reimer, Brenda, was like 13 years old. Like, he was refusing, like, I would refuse to see that man. And on the last visit, I mean, he totally had a nervous breakdown and tried to run away because Dr. Money was trying to introduce him to a man who identified as female. And then eventually the dad broke down and told him the truth for the first time. And Bruce's first question was, what was my name? He told him his name, and then Bruce ended up changing his name to David, and in memory of David defeating this Goliath, that this won't be the end of me. Wow. And then he found out that his case was being used all over the country by Dr. John Money in these academic forums of like, this has been a great success, and he's just transitioning to a mother hen, and this was being hailed, and the feminists were like, hey, look at this. Gender is a social construct. Women don't have to be relegated to domestic duties because these are just cultural impositions. Men and women are the same. And this was all flowing out of his pseudoscience, and it had a tragic ending. His brother died. He ended up committing suicide himself. He got married, adopted a couple kids, and took his own life. David did. But thankfully, before he passed away, he was able to become an advocate for this. He was on the Oprah Winfrey show.
How did he have a couple of kids if he didn't have a penis?
Adoption. Yeah. So he adopted the kids.
All right, Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah, Oprah Winfrey had him on, and he explained this harrowing thing he went through, and how many other kids started coming out of the woodworks after that. Like, Dr. Money did the same thing to me, And so this guy, and he said, David unfortunately was lost to follow up, so I'm not quite sure what happened to him. He knew exactly what was going on, but he was using it to boost his idea of like, hey, pedophilia is acceptable and this and that. I mean, but this is kind of just medically where this stuff was coming from. And after that, the Johns Hopkins Hospital was eventually shut down. Dr. Paul McHughes was looking like, hey, these patients that you guys are transitioning, their mental health is not better after these transitions. It's worse. You are not, you're not helping mental illness. You're collaborating with it. And so I believe it was in 1967 or 76, it was that the Johns Hopkins University's gender transition program was shut down. And then it was opened up several decades later, and now it's all over the country.
Sorry, could I ask real quick? Could you give us a timeline? Because those were great stories, but just for people to like realize how recent this
Alfred
is.
Kinsey comes into this too.
So could you say like when Hirschfeld started and then Money, and just give us some years on that?
Yeah, Hirschfeld, the Institute of Sexual Sciences was in 1919 in Berlin, Germany. He ended up doing his speaking tour in the United States in the early 1950s, and the it was the 1950s. He was out here with Harry Benjamin. Then Harry Benjamin, started working with Dr. John Money in the 1950s and 60s, and the mid 1960s was Dr. John John's money interaction with the Reimer family. Johns Hopkins University was closed down after that and then reopened a couple decades later.
Alfred Kinsey. We have a whole Hollywood movie. Liam Neeson starred him.
I mean, this is a guy who, I mean, as a father of 8 children, your skin crawls just thinking of the things that he did to boys.
Yeah.
I mean, he was doing studies of when children orgasm and how many minutes it takes to stimulate an infant to the point it reaches orgasm. And he defined orgasm as when the baby starts screaming and crying. And it's just like, why is this man not in jail? And this was an extremely broken sexual individual, was unfaithful to his wife and lived, an exceptionally corrupt and immoral life. I mean, but he was a lot like John Money. I mean, John Money is promoting bestiality, showing pornography and bestiality to his university students to destigmatize all sexual acts to them. And these are the godfathers behind this whole thing. And so Alfred Kinsey, who should be thought of as kind of the godfather of sexual education in the United States, because he was behind SIECUS of this whole way of, hey, we need to educate people about human sexuality. And so where should we learn about what people are doing? Well, let's survey men and women. Where are we surveying? Well, let's go to prisons. And so he's surveying male prisoners and sex offenders and using the data from that research to project to the general population of see how deviant we all really are. You guys know you're really this dark deep down, but because of social mores, we all have to act like it, keep it together, but you all have these dark desires, don't you? And so this stuff was coming out in the 60s, and then it became the fuel of the sexual revolution and the curriculums that are largely used in public schools and Planned Parenthood throughout the country.
And Hugh Hefner famously said, if Kinsey is the prophet, I'm his pamphleteer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's all these guys, if you really look at them, had pornographic addictions going on in their own lives. Many of them, if not all of them, pedophilia was a part of their addiction as well. And they're almost seeking to scientifically justify their own brokenness, intellectualizing themselves out of the perversions.
How many minutes do we have until pedophilia is pushed as an acceptable form of sexual interaction on the public?
Oh, I mean, I know Hollywood's already behind. I mean, you look at the stories of some of the actors in Hollywood of how just pandemic it is within Hollywood if you want to advance your career as a child actor. So many of the kids go through this with the producers and the directors and like, hey, come over to my place and, oh yeah, you can be the movie star after that. And you just keep coming by. I mean, the corruption is so deep. It's absolutely heartbreaking. But I'm thanks be to God. Like I had mentioned, I think the pendulum is going to swing back on this thing because like you go to reddit.com right now, one of the subreddits is #Detrans. It's 43,000 detransitioners on Reddit right now, screaming from the rooftops. Like this is not the answer. So this all kind of got started not here in the U.S. It was more over in Western Europe, and so they've been ahead of the curve on this stuff. And so there was a Dutch endocrinologist who decided to start experimenting with puberty blockers because of a girl who didn't identify with her female sex. And so it kind of gave her puberty blockers and then, worked on to cross-sex hormones. And this became what's called the Dutch protocol. And so it started over there in the Netherlands of let's give the kids puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and then if they want the surgery. And so they've been doing that for a while. But what's happened in the last couple of years is just remarkable over there. Like if you show up at a gender clinic in Netherlands now, hi, my daughter is 12 and she identifies as non-binary and she'd like to have puberty blockers. They'll say, okay, well, there's an 18-month waiting list. And then after the 18 months, we're going to take about 9 months and evaluate your case and decide if you're a suitable candidate for puberty blockers. And from the adolescent girls, like, what? By the time I get the drugs, like my puberty is going to be over. And from the clinician's perspective, it's exactly because 80 to 95% of the time, if puberty just goes on, the kids will desist from this. They'll naturally identify with their biological sex. But when they go on the puberty blockers, what ends up happening is literally 99 to 100% of the time, they'll go on to get cross-sex hormones. There's no case studies of a kid that goes on puberty blockers and then just goes off and resumes natural purity or natural puberty. There is no record of no studies of that ever being done because you think, well, why aren't those kids hopping off it and being normal? Well, what it is like if you get puberty blockers at 11 and you're on it for 4 years And then you're 15 and all your buddies have broader shoulders and deeper voices and a 5 o'clock shadow, and you still look like a prepubescent 11-year-old boy. You think you're going to be more identifying in your masculine identity? No less. So they go to the cross-sex hormones and then they're sterilized for life. Because if you go from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, you're sterilized. You will never be able to have kids. And so the people that have gone through this and then they go on the puberty blockers, their neurological development pauses, bone development pauses. So we got like 15-year-old kids now that have osteoporosis, like an 80-year-old woman in their body, and they're 15. And I've read these kids that are like, yeah, I never broke a bone before that, but my toes have broken, I've broken my knuckles, I've broken this, I've broken that, my hips are brittle. And this is, once you pass puberty, like you can't go back and redevelop that bone structure. Like it's a critical time. And say, well, no, people aren't losing bone mass. That's not the issue. They're not gaining the bone mass when they need to be. It's halting it. And so what's happening is these people who are going through this process, getting the double mastectomies, because you can get them now. 12 years old, Oakland, California, double mastectomy. Los Angeles, 13-year-old double mastectomies. Oregon, age of medical consent, 15 years old. Can't get a tattoo of a flower on your ankle at the age of 20. Can't use a tanning salon if you're 17. But you can get both your breasts removed at the age of 15 without your parents even knowing at the age of 15. And so these kids are going through this stuff. And the perfect example of where it leads is this girl, Keira Bell. She was over in the United Kingdom. She went through the puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, double mastectomy. And then at about 22 years old, looked down at the scars like, what did I do to myself? And then she looked up, what did you adults let me do to myself? So she sued them. She sued the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom, Tavistok. Went all the way up to the High Court in England, which is basically their Supreme Court. The judges ruled in her favor. And now Tavistok, the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom, has been ordered to be shut down. Now, original case was appealed and legal battles are still going on or whatever. But now Tavistok, biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom, is shut down. And it's being dispersed into smaller regional clinics with a greater focus on mental health instead of just labeling the kids, you're trans, here's your drugs. And same thing, Sweden, Finland, the Scandinavian countries, it's a lot harder now to get puberty blockers because they realize this is not the answer. Like the data's in. This they call it harking, hypothesizing after the results are known. We already know the results. There's no need to hypothesize. This is not working. It's making problems worse.
We're in the grip of an ideology, though, that refuses to see the truth.
Yeah.
And doesn't want to submit to it.
Yeah. And so the answer, it's money.
Yeah.
Prayer.
Talk more about that.
Well, I mean, you're looking at a multi-million-dollar industry every single year. In a few years, it's going to be in the billions. Because, like, let's say I want to transition to female and I have an orchiectomy. Orchiectomy is the removal of your testes. It's a castration. Okay, now I don't have the natural production of testosterone in my body anymore. 5 years later, I realized that was not the best decision. But now I don't have testosterone. So now I have to become a lifetime medicalization patient of testosterone, even though I've detransitioned, just to try to feel normal as a man again. And so even if I detransition, I still need the synthetic hormones. But if I do want to transition to female, then I'm going to need testosterone blockers and estrogen supplements. Again, lifelong medicalization of this stuff. I mean, the surgeries for a man to have for a female to have a phalloplasty. I remember the article of Gabriel Mack that you had talked about, of that woman who went through this surgery. I think it was in the New York, one of the New York magazines, where it talks about this surgery and all that. Just heartbreaking. Those surgeries can cost anywhere from $40,000 to $100,000 a surgery. And typically the first one's not successful. There needs to be multiple surgeries, sometimes a dozen or more, because sometimes the appendage will die and they need to try again. They've got to harvest tissue. I mean, they take a sleeve of skin from either your entire form or a graft from your thigh, and they use that to fashion a neophallus. And a lot of times it doesn't work, and it physically dies. Gosh. And then more sutures and more pain. You know, it's a horrible thing to have to physically go through. But to me, it should spur a bit of compassion of like, wow, what would drive a person to endure so much suffering just to try to feel at their own body, And so like these people are masochistic, crazy people. No, stop it. Like there's something going on here. There's a story that needs to be listened to of what would drive a person to experience that much suffering. But the cost of these things, $100,000, you know, potentially in one surgery, lifelong medicalization. I mean, there's a major windfall to be had by these pharmaceutical companies, big pharma. But what they will listen to is their shareholders. because if the lawsuits start flooding in, which they're now starting to, the investors are going to realize, okay, where's the tipping point? Where are the lawsuits going to outweigh the revenue that's coming in? And at that point, we're out. And at that point, we don't need to be doing these procedures anymore at our hospital. That's what they're going to listen to. They're not going to listen to my book. They're not going to listen to, documentary videos or whatever for the most part. But when you get enough public awareness and people detransitioning, starting lawsuits, to me, I think they're going to listen to where the money goes.
How do we empower those? How many people did you say on that Reddit forum?
Just on Reddit, it's 42,000 of them.
These
43,000.
These are people who have quote unquote transitioned and who are now...
And transition is a broad term. I mean, you could have social transitioning. I changed my name, my pronouns, my restroom, what sports teams I'm on. I'm
currently changing my nationality.
Yep.
4th of April, I'll be an American.
Congratulations.
I want a front row seat as the ship goes down.
Oi, oi, oi. That is awesome. Good man. So we are kind of heading down. But so you could have social transitioning. You could have puberty blockers as a form of transitioning. Then you could have cross-sex hormones. And when you go on cross-sex hormones, to be clear, it doesn't create genitals of the opposite sex. A lot of people are like, what does that do to you? It creates secondary sex characteristics. And so if you're a woman, you're taking cross-sex hormones, you're getting T or testosterone, your voice will deepen, you'll get some facial hair, redistribution of fat, increased musculature. Those are some of the things that will take place. And for a man, he's taking testosterone blockers, kind of the reverse of redistribution of fat. And then another form of transition would be the surgeries, of which there are dozens and dozens and dozens. So you could have, a facial recontouring, a shaving of your Adam's apple off. There are surgeries that could be done. Surgeries that could be done to your vocal cords to make it a higher pitch, a lower pitch.
What are we doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's heartbreaking. And then, because if you think, like, what if the decisions you made when you were 13 years old could never be changed? Like, I've seen your yearbook photo, Matt. Like, what were you thinking with the hair? But what if that could never change? That's hair, dude. I mean, that's hair. Like, now this is your fertility. And for very few kids, if you tell them these things beforehand, really care. So it's like, I don't need to breastfeed. I don't want a kid 10 years from now anyway.
The question I was going to ask is, how do we empower these 42,000 people? How do we have them and encourage them and bless them and thank them for their courage to stand up against big tech, Disney, etc.?
Yeah, because it's a very frightening journey to be so insistent. No, this is what I am. I am this. I am this. And
people are reluctant to change their mind on tattoos after they get one.
Yeah,
because it feels irreversible.
Yeah,
and then same thing with abortion. Like if you've had that act of abortion, you've got two basic options. I can admit that I paid someone to murder my child and repent of it, or I can say this is healthcare and liberating. Like, that sounds way better.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what that's like once you've had that.
Because if you're an outspoken advocate of abortion, you're posting that on Facebook and all this, and then imagine starting, hey, check out this new video from Lila Rose. I really like the work she's doing at live action. The vitriol that you'll receive from all of your previous friends is overwhelming and makes you want to, like, do I even want to go through with this publicly? Yeah. But now imagine you had to convince your parents to buy off on this, and they bought you a binder, and they paid for your top surgery, and they gave you your hormones, and your mom was there at night injecting the testosterone into your thigh because she thought that that's what she needed to do. Otherwise, you're going to commit suicide. And you got your school to have the school board allow you to use this restroom and be on that sports team. And then this all happened. And then the frontal lobe of your brain became a little more fully developed in the mid-20s. And you decided maybe that wasn't the right thing for me. But now, am I going to lose my identity, my community, and my mission? Because I had all those things. I was this adolescent looking for a place in the world.
We need to give them a new mission.
Yeah.
And that's probably what they're finding on Reddit, like a new mission to proclaim the truth.
Identity, community, and mission. That's why courage, when you touch this subject, people scream at the debates, scream at lectures of Matt Walsh, because you're pulling a scab off in a sense. You're saying, like, I don't just want to debate your ideology. I want your identity, I want your community, and I want your mission to go void. And it's like, it's not that we have this, malignant approach of, like, I want those things, but for the person, it's like,
that's how it feels.
I'm losing all of this.
Yeah.
Because I was navigating through these turbulent years of adolescence and feeling like, what is my place in the world? And then I found that title
and now you
of
want to strip that
non-binary,
away from
or
me.
I found this. And I finally feel like understood and at home in my own body. And I've got people who love me and accept me. And I've got a mission because now we're a victimized minority. And I'm going to lose all of that. And I'll have no friends. And am I even going to pass for my own sex anymore? Like, because a lot of the people that get involved in this can get so deep into it, it's like, wait a minute, I've got, some of the men transitioning to female have clients because they're involved in sex work. That's their source of revenue, because it's very difficult to find gainful employment when you've gone full send on these transitions and you're not very convincing, so to speak, in how you're passing is the opposite sex. Because, okay, well, who's going to hire me when I look like this? So many fall into prostitution, homelessness, and things like that. Gosh. And so it's like, where am I going to go?
Yeah.
I'm just going to look like a freak walking into the guy's bathroom and I've got breast implants. What am I supposed to do? I can't afford to have this. And so you start to have compassion on the story instead of just writing them off as you're some freak of nature who bought this false ideology. It's like, no, they need people to walk with them and accompany them, because they could be at any of these stages of transitioning and then decide this isn't right for me. And then they're technically a detransitioner. And so we need to give them platforms. We need to allow them to speak. They need to be on Pints with Aquinas. They need to be able to share their stories so that other people realize, well, wait a minute, maybe that isn't the answer to everything.
How is Reddit not banned this channel? That's surprising to me.
Beats me. I mean, I don't know who's in charge of those kinds of decisions, but what they're finding.
It's in the description, but I've looked through it before, so I just viewer discretion on the Detrans subreddit, just so everybody's aware.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's all types of content that could be found on that topic online. But what was found, it was interesting over in the Tavistok clinic, there's a book that just came out. I just ordered it from Amazon, and it just came out about the collapse of the Tavistok gender clinic. What they found is they did like a sampling of like 125 kids that went in there for transitioning services. 97.5% of those 125 or so kids had coexisting mental health disorders, meaning only 2.5% of them only had gender dysphoria. And so what ended up happening is they were looking at the body as a kind of a false target of intervention of like, that's what needs to get fixed. We need to change your breasts. We need to change this. We need to change that. But underneath it, you start looking at what's going on. 97.5% of them had coexisting mental health disorders. So what are they? Well, in the trans community, 42% of people who identify as trans meet the criterion for an autism diagnosis. 42%. Then you've got anxiety, you've got depression, you've got a history of trauma, all this stuff. And a lot of times, to me, it's almost like anorexia in the sense that if a girl feels like her life is out of control, but she can count her macros and she can count those calories, it's like she's got a sense of control over something in her life. And so for a person, especially on the autistic spectrum, and that often involves like a very rigid thinking pattern, an obsessive interest in a particular topic, identifying more with things than with people, they can lock into this is like, this is the answer to why socially never really fit in. And they lock in really tight on this stuff, go through the transitionings, then the anesthesia wears off and the problems are still there. I know one anesthesiologist who said, I've told the doctors, don't even come to me if you want me to perform anesthesia on one of these patients. Because he said, look, I've seen the mental chart. I've seen the medical charts, the comorbidities that are going on in these kids' lives, the depression, anxiety, autism. And he said, to medicalize this stuff with hormones and surgeries, he said, that is malpractice. You're just collaborating with mental illness. I'll have nothing to do with that.
Can we pause and offer a prayer? Because I think there's going to be men and women struggling with their sexual identity, or those who have quote unquote transitioned, and gosh, we just want to tell you that we love you and we're so sorry for the pain you're experiencing and maybe the ways that you've been villainized by people on my side, as it were. And could you just offer a prayer for them right now so that they could pray with us?
Yeah. Heavenly Father, in your word, the scriptures, you say that you loathe nothing that you have created, for you would not have created anything if you had hated it. Father, you created these individuals by love, out of love, and for love. And at these times in their life that they might not feel that you love them, or that they even love themselves, or the church loves them, we ask you to pierce through that darkness to help them to know that you created them good and that you have a plan for their life.
Yes, Jesus.
And in the midst of this suffering, when we think that your son, Jesus Christ, is the furthest away from us, in those times of feeling forsaken by God and by man, of where your one companion is darkness, where you're completely alone, that you're living the Psalms in your moment of desolation, that Christ can't be found outside of you because Christ crucified is living in you. and that he is sanctifying you through this suffering. And we pray, Lord, that you would send into these individuals' lives friends and family members whose hearts would be open, whose minds would be open to receive and walk with these individuals, not needing to have all of the answers, but just needing to love and walk and be with these people exactly where they are at, knowing that, God, you will complete the good work that you have begun in them. Amen.
Amen. You said earlier the good work of Matt Walsh. What did you think of What is a Woman? When did you watch it? What was that experience like?
No, I mean, Matt's been doing fantastic, courageous work on this hated by tens of thousands of people that think he's the devil incarnate for being so bold to speak out on Vanderbilt and all these things. But he's a cultural warrior in the sense of he's on the front lines addressing this as an ideology of really focusing look, this is what's going on. And so I think that film would be excellent to show to high school junior theology, morality classes, hey, this is what's going on here. Show it to university students of hey, let's watch this on campus and let's have a civil discourse about it. What did you agree with? What did you not agree with? And so I think from an expose perspective of a documentary, look, this is the reality of what we're talking about here. I think it's fantastic. I think the maybe the weaker points might be, let's go into hope here. Let's go into the pastoral approach, the love of these individuals. And okay, what do we have to offer them? Why is this not the answer? Well, what is the answer? And really helping to distinguish, okay, gender theory is over here, gender dysphoria is over here. Let's spend some time addressing both instead of just defeating the ideology and pointing out the doctors behind this stuff, their understanding of the human person is so broken. You talk to the detransitioners, this was not the answer for me. Let's spend a little more time over here. Okay, if you experience gender dysphoria, here are some resources for you. And here's some places that you can go to find support and love. And I would have liked to see more of that, but as a church, we need to make those things. We have a website, chastity.com, and a link /gender, where whenever I find good stuff, links, podcasts, detransitioners, platforms, I'm sticking them all up there. Persononidentity.com is a great website for schools and churches. We're sticking it all, chastity.com /gender.
We'll put it in the description.
But on it, we've got a ways to go. I mean, there's ministries in the church like Courage, but we got to grow out these things on a broader way to respond to this instead of just disproving it. And so we do need to take an intellectual approach, but pastorally, we've got it's mystifying for a lot of people. It's like, well, what is non-binary? And what is this? I don't get this stuff. You're either XX or XY, that's all there is to it. It's like, wait a minute. It does feel like you're learning a foreign language, but I remember my cousin fell in love with this girl from Russia and he wanted to impress her, so he learned Russian. And isn't that what you do when you love somebody?
Very impressive.
It's so the same respect, this might feel like a foreign language, but if you want to communicate to someone, you better learn their language.
Ooh, I like that.
Doesn't mean it has to become your first native tongue, but you got to learn their language out of love. That's what you do.
How do you learn the language without capitulating and using false language? That communicates falsehoods.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge, but we got to look at our language. Okay, what types of words are we using? Am I adopting words like cis-male? Cis-male means that the biological sex you are assigned at birth aligns with the gender that you identify as. And so you're a cis-male, and if a woman transitions to male, she's a trans male. It's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so there's trans males and cis males. We need to avoid, because trans means on the other side of, cis is more on this side of, on the same aligning with. We need to avoid those languages because that implies there's different ways to be male.
Right.
And that's obfuscating language. It's also obfuscating language to say, well, that person's born male. It's like, whoa, time out. They're born male or they're male. Because what was so miraculous that happened at the moment of birth that had to do with their maleness? Were they male at, why don't we call them male at 2 or male at, in utero or male at 40? They're male. That is something that will not change 10,000 years after they're dead. Exhume the remains, the bones are from a male person. And so born male is not a helpful thing. Biological male, that's same thing.
A linguistic concession.
Exactly. Is there another kind of male than a biological one? It's like calling it a four-sided square. Well, are there squares that don't have 4 sides? Then why are we adding that descriptive?
That's right.
We're adding it as a linguistic loophole to open the door for males who aren't biological
gay
ones.
For example,
Yeah, and so we've got to be careful on our language. Even the term transitioning.
Yeah.
Like you can't transition. I can't transition to this table. I can't transition to be the Atlantic Ocean. Like, I can't transition to something other than I am. Now, what's interesting is as you start to do the research, there are species that can transition sex.
Okay.
I was doing research on this. There are fish called the goby fish and the blue-headed wrasse. And it's fascinating. You'll have a habitat of fish, most of whom will be female with one alpha male. If you reach into the bowl, you pull out the alpha male, the largest female within about a week will fully transition into a biological male capable of reproducing with the other females in the habitat. Then you take the original alpha male, put him back into the habitat. Not only will the female who had become male revert back to the female sex, she'll again be capable of reproducing with him as a female. And these transitions can happen in a matter of days with like the bluehead wrasse fish. It's called sequential hermaphroditism, and it's present in a fraction of less than 1% of the animal kingdom, but it does exist.
Okay.
But even as that, it doesn't disprove what the church teaches, it proves it, because sex is being defined by how an organism is organized for reproduction. And so for that organism, they can transition from one sex to the other. But for humans, we're a sexually dimorphic species. You either have a mature reproductive cell of a sperm or mature reproductive cell of an egg. There's no third gamete. There can be disorders of sexual development, but there is no third gonad. You know, you've got ovaries and testes. That's it. There's no in-between gonad. There's no fourth gonad that would serve a different purpose than these. If anything, the disorders of sexual development are just a deficiency in one or both of those. And so for the human being, every cell of the human body that has a cell is sexed. That's why you can't have a sex change. You'd have to change every cell. I mean, they found more than 6,500 sex-specific genes so that like your arteries are male or female. Like your esophagus is male or female. Your spleen is female. I can take one hair out of your head. Forensic scientists say male. And so as a human being, science, I mean, even Richard Dawkins, I don't know if you just saw it yesterday. He's like, nope. He said, as a biologist, male or female, that's the end of the discussion. He said, gender, I don't even want to talk about that. But from a biological perspective, let's just be clear. There's only two.
God bless him.
Yeah. And so for a person, now a person who identifies as trans might say, look, I'm not arguing with any of that stuff. I'm not saying biologically I'm male. What I'm saying is I identify as female, and so my internal sense of identity, in a sense, trumps biology.
Yeah. We were sitting down in Georgia, and you were talking to me about just these distinct differences, how men and women are different, you know? And you talked about our eyes.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about that?
That was one of my favorite parts to research on the book, because I've always wanted to really dig into that stuff. And so I started researching it. And you'll hear these stereotypes. Oh, women are more sensitive than men. Oh, that's just a stereotype. Like, no. Like at every level. You just start like with the senses, the sense of hearing of a woman. Inside the inner structure of a woman's ear are microscopic hairs. Men have them too, but women's vibrate at a far greater intensity than the man, which makes her capable of hearing inflections and nuances in the human voice that are completely imperceptible to the male brain.
Oh my!
Yeah, I think there's entire conversations the male brain can't hear as well. Yeah. So she can hear, but she can pick up like, I think there's a little more behind that story. She can pick it up. We can't. And if you teach little boys, you have to actually speak 8 decibels louder for a boy to hear you than the girl. It's not a guarantee they're listening, but they can at least actually hear you. And then, so where the men though exceed at hearing in comparison to the women, men are far superior when it comes to locating the origin of a sound in 3-dimensional space. So Matt Fradd is hunting for a zebra in Africa, and he hears a crunch of a branch 30 yards away southeast. That's where the sound came from. We can pinpoint the origin of a sound, whereas the women can't do that with as much clarity. But women have other gifts of hearing. They can multitask. This one's really neat, that when a man is reading a book, so you've got Matt Fradd, and he's reading Aquinas, and Cameron is trying to talk to him. If you do a brain scan of your brain while you're reading Aquinas, you are functionally deaf as a male. Like, I've had my children scream at me like, Dad, and I'm like, why are you yelling at me? And she's like, we called your name 9 times. And I'm like, I was reading an email. Like, I couldn't hear. We actually become deaf as men functionally when we're reading a book, for the most part. Now, with the women's brain, what's interesting, they're using both hemispheres of their brain to listen. We only use the one side. So if you hit a man hard enough in the left side of his head, he can go completely mute. If you hit a woman there, she'll just keep right on talking. so these are just the hearing stuff. And I've seen it with my daughter in terms of like the multitasking. we're sitting at a restaurant once, and just her and I, and then there's a lull in the conversation, and then I'm like, Mary, what are you thinking? And she's like, shush. I'm like, what do you mean shush? I'm like, we're the only people at the table. What do you mean shush? And it turns out she's doing audio surveillance of all the conversations at the tables adjacent to us. She's listening to all the details on their personal relationships of what's going on. I mean, even the couples she can't listen to, she's just looking at their body language. And she's like, yep, see them? He likes her more than she likes him. And those two, they're not getting along over at that table. Like, she's absorbing all of this content simultaneously, like this maternal ears. Okay. Well, the man, now these things are generalizations. There are men.
Because I was about to say that I think I'm more like that than my wife. Yes, I would like to be able to go into a room and not care what's going on. I don't know if it's ADD or what, but all the things that are taking place hit my brain at once, and I'm aware of all of them. So I get exhausted.
It is a trait of
quickly.
ADD to be able to be distracted by how many external noises there are instead of just laser beaming. Yes. I mean, John Paul II could read a book on philosophy while someone is reading him a book on theology at the same time, and he'd absorb both sources simultaneously. Monsignor Jeevish said that it was actually true. He could learn 2 books simultaneously. So these things are generalizations, but at the same time, they're neurological realities that men, by and large, for the most part, have that gift in terms of the hearing. You go into the smell. At the base of the woman's brain, the olfactory bulb involves the nerves that go into her brain for smell. Women have 7 million more cells in their olfactory bulb, which means they can discern between scents with much greater accuracy than men. So if Cameron goes into Liam's bedroom, like, Liam, it smells disgusting in here, and Liam's like, oh no, it smells good to me, Mom. Like, dude, she's right. It's rancid, but the boy can't even smell it. And so the sensitivity of the ears, the eyes, women can discern colors differently than men can. That's why they have colors like fuchsia and mauve and taupe and like brown, red, green. And so the eyes, the sensitivity, one of the ones that I really liked, that in just terms of sensitivity of empathy, this was probably my favorite. Scientists took a room full of boys and girls, I don't know, like 5 to 8 years old or whatever, and put up a wall and had a baby crying on the other side of the wall. And he put a microphone and an intercom so you could hear the baby crying on the other side of the wall. And you could either click a button to talk to the baby, or you could just hit the mute button, then you don't have to hear the baby anymore. So you see where this is going. All the girls go up to the wall, hey, little baby, da, 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 da. And the boys just walk over, boom, problem solved. Just mute the kid. And so it's a sign of empathy. But like these things, there are neurological differences, but we need to understand these are by and large, for the most part, kind of things. These are generalizations in terms of like hey, well, what if I'm a little bit more like this? And so like if, for example, if a girl has a certain thing, where she has more testosterone in her body, there's a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where she's going to have a lot more testosterone in her body. And so she'll be more likely to play with boys. She'll be more likely to roughhouse, more likely to identify as tomboy, even more likely to identify as lesbian. But none of that makes her anything less than female. And so we need to be careful when addressing the differences to say, okay, well, there can be some variation here, but there also are biological immutable realities as well.
So if you don't like the materialist sort of XX, XY chromosome thing, how would you answer the question, what is a woman? How would you sort of maybe improve upon what Matt had to say in his documentary?
You could almost put it upside down. Instead of asking what is a woman, you could just ask, what is a person who gestates and gives birth to a child? What do you call that? Like, what is that? And then it's flipping the question backwards, and it's like, well, yeah, what do we call that? And so from a biological perspective, as I'd mentioned, sex is determined by how an organism is organized for reproduction. And from a Catholic perspective, it's not simply the parts. Like you have the part to do that, you have the part to do that. It's more in the full sense of vocation to fatherhood and motherhood. And so the body does reveal to us our identity, whereas with gender theory, the body is meaningless. It doesn't reveal anything, which is really strange how they try to say, well, look, there's a little brain science saying this, or what about intersex conditions? It's like, well, wait a minute. Are you telling me we should look to the body to tell us our identity? Ooh. I mean, if you're going to be a dualist, at least behave yourself and be a good one. Like, don't go looking at the body if you want me to tell me that the identity is untethered from the body. Like, you need to stay in your camp.
Because that's the number one thing I kept getting told to me when I would bring this up is, what about intersex people? What about people with ambiguous genitalia? Yeah. That's a great response.
Yeah. I mean, that's the start of a response, but then we also have to go there. We're like, well, let's look at these intersex conditions and see if it really is saying what you're saying. Because there was a woman named Anne Fausto Sterling in academia, and she said, you know what? Intersex is more common than people who have red hair. 2% of the whole population is intersex, and sex itself is a spectrum. There aren't just two sexes. There's all kinds of... So she's teaching this at all the university settings, and the the students are like, oh, wow, I had no idea intersex was as common as having red hair, and it's 2% of the whole population. I had no idea that I'm sitting here in this class and there could be 8 other students who are intersex, and oh my goodness, I feel so bad, I never even knew. Well, let's look at her numbers. If you look at all of the disorders of sexual development that she kind of lays out, and you start going through them, it's like 90-something% of these are not intersex conditions. They are disorders of sexual development. You start going down them, like one is Klinefelter's. You hear that one thrown out. Well, what if a person has Klinefelter's? I mean, in that intersex, there's no clinical sense in which Klinefelter's or Turner's is an intersex condition. So Klinefelter's is when a man is born, and when he's conceived, he either inherits an extra X chromosome from his mother or father. It could actually inherit several X's. So instead of just XY, he could be XXY or XXXXY. And so what that will do for him developmentally, he'll have smaller testicles, a little bit of enlargement of the breast tissue, but he's completely male. In fact, some men will live their entire lives with Klinefelter's unaware that they even have it. A lot of guys don't even know they have it until they seek treatment for infertility, and the doctor explains, oh, you have Klinefelter's, but he's a man. And so the female equivalent of that would be Turner syndrome. And so that's when a woman is born with a missing or partially deleted second X chromosome from most of all of her cells. And since you need 2 X chromosomes to have a fully functioning ovary, these women are typically infertile and they don't experience normal puberty. So they tend to be a little bit shorter in stature, but they're fully women. And so there's no clinical sense that Klinefelter or Turner's is an intersex condition. And so then the next one that Ann Fausto threw out there was LOCA, which is late onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia. These are women, many of whom can give birth. Many of them don't even know they have this condition until they're in their mid-20s. There's no genital ambiguity going on whatsoever. You remove just these couple ones out of her statistics, and 2% slides down to 0.02%. Now, do the math on 0.02%. It is 1 out of 5,000 or 2 out of every 10,000 live births. And that's the more accurate figure for intersex conditions. And so we need to first be fair about the numbers. So that's the first thing I'd address. Okay, are you blowing out these numbers to make it look like it's bigger than it is? But even if there's one on the planet, what does that tell us? And so let's look at those. And so the most common one is called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And this is when the woman's body is producing too much testosterone. Now, boys can have it too, but because it doesn't cause any genital abnormalities, it's not considered an intersex condition for the males. So for the girls, it is. And about 1 out of every 30,000 experience. This is the most common intersex condition. And so for the girl, there's going to be a slight virilization of her genitalia, meaning that it's going to be a slightly enlarged clitoris. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, the woman has an excess of testosterone in her body. And because of that, she'll be more masculinized in her features. So she'll have a more developed clitoris. It's going to be slightly enlarged. And these women tend to have more testosterone, but they are female beings. It's the other one, my mistake, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. That will be XY. Okay. That will have the SRY gene. But, however, because her body cannot respond to testosterone in the natural way, and then in her case, she will develop as female. She'll have the undescended testes that are later removed. And so these are intersex conditions, but what will happen when a baby is born with an ambiguous genitalia, or when the genitalia doesn't quite line up with the chromosomes, what they will do is they'll bring in a team of experts. They'll bring in a urologist, a specialist in pediatric medicine, an endocrinologist, even a psychologist, and they'll meet with the family. And then they'll say, okay, I know this delivery wasn't quite what you were expecting, and this may be a little surprise that things didn't look quite normal, but we're going to do some testing and we're going to do some digging, and we're going to try to find out with you exactly what's going on. And so with a little bit of research, they can find out, yes, this is a biological male, but here's what's going on. Or this is a biological female, but this is a disorder of sexual development that's happening. Now, the most rare case is something called ovotesticular disorder, or true hermaphroditism. This is where a person will have both ovarian and testicular tissue in their body and can have many different variations of form, but typically only one of the two gonads will be functional. So we don't have any cases of someone that can impregnate themselves. So you can't have a functional ovary, functional sperm, and the woman produces asexually. We don't have that. It's typically very clearly one or the other. Some people have something called a mosaic, which is where 2 sperm, an X and a Y, fertilize an egg at the same time. And so the person can have XX and XY chromosomes in the same body. And then there's another thing, lastly, called chimerism, where you've got 2 eggs, one male, one female, and one of the embryos dies and is resorbed or absorbed by the other embryo. And so this individual will have two sets of chromosomes, two sets of DNA in the same individual. Now, typically they don't have ambiguous genitalia, but that's kind of a broad overview scope of all that stuff. Wow. I mean, it can be a little bit overwhelming.
I mean, language,
Yeah, it is. But these things, you can only identify a disorder of sexual development in light of a sexual binary. If you don't have male and female, then you couldn't even know what is a disorder of sexual development. It's like, well, how could I know I'm missing a finger unless I know I'm supposed to have 5 as a person?
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, let's take a break, and then we'll come back, and we've got a bunch of questions from our local supporters. And feel free to send in a super chat, and we'll try to get all the questions to all the questions. So if you haven't yet got the app Hallow, what are you doing? If you have a smartphone, go and download Hallow. But first, go to hallow.com/MattFradd. Hallow is the #1 Catholic prayer and meditation app on the web, and it's fantastic. And it actually beat TikTok recently as far as in the App Store. Did you know that? It's crazy.
No, I didn't.
It's legit. Hallow.com/MattFradd. Go over there, sign up. You'll get 3 months for free. If at the end of the 3 months you don't want it anymore, you can quit and you don't have to pay a cent. They have sleep stories. They'll help you pray the rosary. It's really fantastic. Also, if you've got kids, it's nice to play little sleep stories for them. Hallow, HALLOW.com/MattFradd. Click the link in the description below. I want to say thank you to a new sponsor, EverythingCatholic.com. Maybe you like Amazon, but you're tired of giving them money. What if you could give your money to a Catholic company that sold everything Catholic, and in so doing, not only support that Catholic company, but support Catholic artisans and craftsmen as well? I've got a bunch of stuff that they just sent me. We have a Chrism scented beeswax candle, which Thursday thinks smells delightful. We even have Chrism lotion cream. They have rosary bracelets. They have kids' books. They have... What is this? This is like a Mary doll for your children. Rosaries, kids' books, all sorts of stuff. Go to everythingcatholic.com right now, and when you use the promo code PINTS, you'll get 15% off. So go support an excellent Catholic company, as well as I say, excellent Catholic small businessmen and craftsmen. Everythingcatholic.com. Live.
Okay, we're back.
All right, see ya.
Thank you guys for coming.
We are back.
We're live right now, but it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it was great. It was awesome to see.
All right. Hey, everybody. We're back, and we are going to try to give people free copies of this book. So, but I have to try to see if the promo code will work before I announce it. Oh, wow. Okay, so it's just if I use this link.
Yeah, just use that link and it'll take you right there to get in the first 250. Get it.
All right, everybody. So we're gonna do a giveaway. We're gonna give away 250. What?
Look into that camera.
Oh, hey, we're gonna give away 250 copies of this book. I'm gonna buy them. You're just gonna pay shipping. So I'm gonna give you that link soon, not now. So stick around, and at some point I'll throw that link out. And the first 250 of you, I'll buy the book for. if you happen to be, and this might even be after the live stream, we may not have 250 people, so please feel free to try. We'll in a minute, not yet, but we'll put a link in the description for these free books. Go over there, get it, and then if you're past 250, you can always buy it.
I sent me the questions. So if you open your Slack chat with me.
And then we also have them in bulk. If people want to get them for their classes, we want to make them dirt cheap. So it's like $5 a piece if they want to get boxes of them for their campus ministry or whatever.
Right. Again, this book we're talking about, Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. Hey, let's talk about this book. You talk, Call Me Max. And I said, oh, did you write this? And you went, no, I keep it in my gun safe at home. So what is this?
So I was just speaking at high schools out in Boston, and a parent gave me a little email they got from the Department of Education for the state of Massachusetts, where they mandated for this book and about 10 others to be read to every single kid starting at pre-K, which is 4 years old, throughout the state of Massachusetts. 480,000 kids had to have this read aloud to this book. And so I ordered all the books on Amazon. There were like 10 or a dozen of these books. And so I get it and I'm like, okay, here we go. And you dive in, and all of them are stories. This is the story of a girl named Max. And it's talking about, I'll just do a little, when a baby is born.
Yes.
And here's the mom and the dad holding their newborn baby. When a baby's born, a grown-up says, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a brand new baby. But if a brand new baby could talk, sometimes that baby might say, no, I'm not. When a baby grows up to be transgender, it means that the grown-up who said they were a boy or a girl made a mistake. And so we're telling these 4-year-old girls and boys, your doctor and your parents may have made a mistake if they thought that you were a boy or a girl. And so this is being read to these kids. And, there's all kinds of different books in this whole genre. This one's for the 4-year-olds. This one's for the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 500,000 kids had to sit and listen to that stuff.
That's disgusting.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's...
If the death penalty were permissible, there would be certain people that I think ought to receive it.
To me, a lot of people think this is like a left or right issue. It's not. I mean, there are people in the trans community who say this is child abuse. You should not be giving kids puberty blockers. You should not be reading this stuff in drag queen story hours and libraries. And these are not right-wing Republican folks. These are people in the trans community say, leave the kids alone. It's wrong to indoctrinate them. I mean, Pope Francis called it ideological colonization when we're imposing this onto other cultures, especially onto the kids.
It's important that we also state that we're not just saying that this is inappropriate for children. We're saying this should be illegal for adults. Yeah. Correct?
Well, I mean, I think it's fine to read the stuff.
Oh, I don't mean read. Yeah. I mean to go through a quote-unquote transition surgery.
Yeah, see, to me, it's let's not criminalize the people who went through it. The question isn't, do I have the right to have this done to my body? It's like, do physicians have a right to do these things to people? Yeah. Because if you're experiencing like a bodily identity integrity disorder where I think my arm shouldn't be there, and you go to a doctor and say, I want you amputated.
It's the bastard who does that to you. Yeah.
I mean, if a doctor's seeing a teenage girl and she thinks she's obese and she's actually anorexic, and he's giving her diet pills and a liposuction, take away the guy's license. It's like, no, that's not the treatment protocol for a girl whose mind is not in conformity with the reality of her body. And so that's not what we do in other fields of medicine. But then when it comes to sexuality, and that's why if you want to have an elective hysterectomy under the age of 25, you can't do it. Like if you're a 21-year-old college girl, like, I don't want to have babies, I want a hysterectomy, they won't give it to you. Yeah. But if you're 21, you say you're trans, then they will give it to you. So it's fascinating that you can't have an elective hysterectomy for contraceptive purposes under the age of 25, but you can if you identify as trans and you want the uterus out of your body.
All right, we have questions from local supporters. If you're watching right now and you're a part of Locals, go over and put in a question. Let's try to get to some of these here. Little Pole says, hi Jason, in light of people seeing their identity as being untethered from their bodies, how do you think we can best help and love people who have bought into transgenderism?
Well, I think one thing we need to do is help them realize that there's a lot of different ways to be male. There's a lot of ways to be female. You don't have to fit into this cookie cutter, stereotypical, like if you're a real man, you're into drinking beer and shooting deer and watching NASCAR. And if you're not, well, you're not that much of a man. It's like, well, no. I mean, you think of the most masculine man I've ever met was Pope John Paul II, and he deeply loved theater and poetry and the arts. I mean, he was an outdoorsman and skiing and all that stuff, but like he loved theater, poetry, arts. And if he grew up today, He'd be told like, no, if you're into theater and poetry and arts, you're not that much of a man.
Yeah.
Like these are bogus gender stereotypes. And so I think we need to deconstruct these overly rigid gender stereotypes to let people know there's a lot of room to be a man, a lot of room to be a woman. There's plenty of room for Joan of Arc's in the church, plenty of room for Therese of Lisieux. That's what you love about the saints, is so they're so radically unique in how they express their sexuality. I mean, you've got Saint Vitalis of Gaza would like go minister in the brothels, and then Aquinas, is chasing her out with a hot firebrand, different approaches. And so I think we've got to help young people understand. So if like you've got a kid who's maybe a little gender non-conforming and he likes to be doing the, plays and theater, go cheer for him. You be there in the front row. You root for that kid in his play. You don't be like, no, you're going to throw a football like dad. It's like that stuff's really harmful. So we've got to make sure that they understand there's a lot of room to be a man, a lot of room to be a woman. You don't have to fit that mold. God made you. And what I try to tell them is like, if God could tell you anything, I think he would say that you were not born into the wrong body. You were born into the wrong culture. A culture that told you might have to hurt your body to be your authentic self. But your body doesn't need to be reconstructed. It's our culture that needs to be reconstructed. And God has created you for such a time as this to do that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Alyssa says, I'm a middle school religion teacher at a Catholic school. Do you have any suggestions for resources, curriculum for this age group to talk about chastity, pornography, LGBT, marriage, etc.?
Yeah. A couple of thoughts. One thing, I would go to personandidentity.com and pass on to them that link to your principal, because the school needs to be formulating policies in the parent handbooks so the parents know, if you come to our school, you need to understand that we teach Catholic anthropology, which is XYZ, so that you're not reacting if a kid shows up and says, oh, I'm trans and my parents want you to use my preferred pronoun. You need to have these policies already in place. And so personandidentity.com is a good resource for that. Okay. In terms of curricula, Ascension came out with Theology Body for Teens Middle School Edition. And so that one's helpful if you got middle school kids. You've also got groups like TOBET, Theology of the Body Evangelization Team, and Ruah Woods, which are both created curricula for the younger crowds. You can get books, resources, curriculum, starting like kindergarten all the way up. I think Ruah Woods has them, grade by grade. And so get those things implemented so we're not dropping some theology of the body bomb on the kids when they're sophomores in high school and they don't know what it is before then. And so it's got to be obviously age appropriate of teaching them the meaningfulness of the body, the goodness of the body, that you are not a non-bodily person inhabiting a non-personal body. Like, let's give these kids age-appropriate anthropology so they don't get swept down the stream. And you could start real simple of like, your body is you. If you say, I'm going to the store, well, your body's probably going to the store as well. Because the body isn't just something you have, like you have a pair of jeans. Your body is you. And God made you good. And so just really an affirmative tone, and that there's lots of room to be different boys and different girls. You don't have to fit this and fit that. You can still be who you are. I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of these stereotype-induced forms of gender dysphoria.
And I wonder, as this gender ideology stuff pervades our culture, if we're going to revert to this, you're going to see men hamming up the low voice and the beards and it's like, we don't know what a man or a woman is anymore. Well, I'm going to bloody well show you that I know what it is, and I'm going to adopt to myself all the accidentals of manhood. Yeah, now, I think there could be some pendulum swinging a little bit too far to this side or that side, but in the end, it's a blessing that we're having to rediscover what it means to be human. Yeah. That we're having to ask these questions, like, what is a woman? This is a good question, to be asking. Like, really, what is femininity? What is the feminine genius? Is there a masculine genius? Why don't you ever hear about that? I mean, feminine genius, it's this and this, and what do we have? I mean, like barbecue or like cigars. Like what do we have that's unique to men? And it's a blessing that we're able to rediscover this stuff, and that John Paul's kind of front loaded it all with the theology of the body, so that we've got this authentic anthropology to stand on to learn who we are. Okay. David, who is a viewer from Germany, and says, please pray for our bishops. He says, will there be any German translation of Jason's book and or other books regarding this sort of stuff? Yeah, we've got 2 or 3 of our books being translated into German right now. We've got Theology of the Body in 1 Hour. I believe that was just translated into German. Pure Love, it was just translated into German as well. If you go to chastity.com and click on the books, as soon as we have translations, because we've got dozens in different languages, you look around for the word German and then click it, and then we'll have a link over to the publishing houses over there. But I'd be happy to have this translated. Anyone in the world, I mean, we get emails every week. Hey, we want to translate this into German or Croatian or whatever, and we're like, hey, here you go. We'll literally, if you want to print this anywhere in the world and give it away for free,
or sell it at what it costs you to print it, we'll just give you the license. Well, we don't need any royalties. If you want to make income off of it, then we can do some royalty type of deal. But if you're just going to print it to give it away or sell it, every single thing we publish at Chastity Project, we give to anybody in the world. And they're printing it in China, in the underground church, all over the place. And that's kind of the idea we have. If you've got the heart that we have to just get this message out, those files are yours. And, we'll work with you.
Reverend Mr. Paul Bourne says, please tell Jason that he spoke to my childhood parish, St. Patrick's in Stoneham, Massachusetts. When I was starting high school, these talks convinced me about the truth of chastity, and now I am 2 months away from being ordained a priest. God used Jason to save me from so many dangers to my Christian and priestly vocation over the years. Deo gracias.
Oh, praise God. Praise God. And it's Stoneham, Massachusetts, by the way. You can't say Stoneham.
Stoneham. Okay. Matt P. says, please thank him for all he does. I would love to hear some practical tips for modesty in dress for men and women in the world today.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you don't hear about, modesty for men. Nobody talks about it. Because, part of that's we've reduced modesty to clothing. Mm-hmm. And if modesty is only clothing, then, well, I mean, we have pants on. I mean, we're good today. I got a shirt on. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
I think we've made a mistake of reducing modesty to only clothing. What about the modesty of my intentions? What about the modesty of my speech? What about the modesty of the way that I'm dressing or, dancing? It's a much broader concept. And so I think women typically, if you wanted to incentivize a woman to be more modest, I think the first thing we need to do for the women is really enter into why do women have an anaphylactic reaction to the modesty? You just bring it up, and a lot of times it's just whoa, you don't want to go there. And I think, why is there that allergic reaction to the topic of modesty for many women? And I think there's really, really good reasons that have to be affirmed. I mean, the first of which is that for thousands of years, the whole problem of lust has been blamed on the woman. Well, you're the adulteress, you're the seductress, you're the occasion of sin. You were the woman caught in adultery. I mean, you were wearing that outfit. You were kind of asking for it. I mean, that mentality has been pervasive through thousands of years of culture. The woman caught in adultery, where's the guy? He's not around. She's the one getting stoned. So because that this idea that the woman's body is the trigger of lust, well, that's the problem. But what I look at is what's the cause of robbery? Is the cause of robbery the presence of jewelry in the window of the store or the presence of greed in the heart of the robber? Greed causes robbery. Jewelry does not.
It's appropriate to display jewelry. It's not appropriate to display cleavage or the womb.
No, this is, but we have to understand the body is not the cause, the actual cause of the lust. The cause is the human heart, because there's plenty of cleavage in St. Peter's Square. There's St. Peter's Basilica.
Yeah.
I mean, the very icon of chastity in St. Peter's is a bare-breasted woman. That's the image of chastity in St. Peter's Square. Yeah. She's displaying her body parts. But there's an ethos John Paul talked about of the artist. He has a responsibility in how he portrays the body. And then there's also a responsibility of the person viewing the art. And both of them have to work in tandem to look at the body reverently. And so I think what we need to help women understand, it's not to say, oh, well, then you can just dress however you want. No, we don't want to do that. But we also don't want to say the body is the cause of lust, because that's false. The human heart is the cause of lust. And if I can externalize the blame to the body of the woman, I'm free, because the outfit is what caused the whole issue. It's there's a deeper wound that needs to be healed here, because I need to try to arrive at a place of Christianity that if I see a woman dressed immodestly, instead of just lusting after her, I could have a sexual reaction of wow, that's beautiful. But now what do I do with that reaction? Can I just stop for a second and say, God, thank you for making her beautiful. And I pray for her, and I'm responding to the beauty of the body with love, instead of thinking that her body forced me to lust. I have no freedom of will. It makes me a slave of my instincts. It robs me of my own dignity if somebody can cause me, strictly speaking, to sin. I still have to have my agency. And so I could see somebody immodest, be tempted to sin, but use your self-will to say, hey, look, that woman's worth a lot more than her body parts. And so God bless her, and I pray for her, and you try to move on. And obviously that's a continual battle. But I think step one for the women, help them to understand it isn't right to just blame women for men's lust. Men need to take their part in this whole thing. The second thing I think women need to hear is it isn't fair how often women get the modesty message and guys get kind of off the hook. And because you never hear homilies of male modesty. And the reason for that is, like I said, we reduced it to clothing. And if modesty is clothing, I wouldn't even know what to wear if I wanted to be immodest. I mean, if I wanted to seduce someone, what am I going to put on a cowboy hat or fireman? Yeah, look at that. I mean, people are laughing. I mean, that's how hopeless the cause is. And so because we just made the mistake of thinking it's clothing, And then we just think, oh, that's the girl's domain over there.
Yeah.
And so we've got to say, okay, well, maybe it means different things. Like maybe girls could be triggered by male immodesty if he's walking around the gym with his shirt off, or, he's wearing super, tight suit. I've had girls say, like, when guys are wearing super tight suits, sometimes, that's a real temptation for me. But we've got to realize we got to drop this mentality. Well, am I my brother's keeper? If he has a problem of lust, that's his own problem. I don't need to worry about that. It's like, well, yeah, let's work together to kind of build a civilization of love. John Paul talked about modesty is making a way for love. And so it's not because your body is bad. It's because your body's so wonderful that sometimes the sexual value will eclipse the personal value. And so what we're trying to do is put the personal value in front of the sexual value. And so modesty is just trying to right order those values.
Yeah, that's good. I was reading Thomas Aquinas the other day, who said that an immodestly dressed woman is like one who digs a hole and then covers it up to trap a man.
Oh,
so I think we'd want to affirm that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, also make, right? And it sounds like you're doing that. Like you're saying both have a part here.
Yeah.
We can't offload the blame to the woman.
Yeah, but not that Aquinas wasn't a bright guy, because I think he had a couple insights along the way. Women mostly aren't doing this to get a guy to fall. They frankly they're not interested in what the guy thinks. She's dressing for herself or for the other girls.
No, fair enough.
Not for the guys.
Fair enough.
But there's an act of omission there that I should have been thinking of this person.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can ascribe a malicious intent of like, I want to wear this to make guys to lust. Like they don't think like that. That's not on the radar.
Okay.
I mean, men like when men dress, and like, let's say we showed up at the studio this morning wearing the same thing, like, oh, we're twinsies. But like if girls show up at a party wearing the same thing, it's just like a stare down. It's like, oh, she looks better than I do. Yeah. It's a competitive thing. So when women dress, it's more often for other girls or for themselves, not for the guys.
Yeah, fair
That's
enough.
why we need to invite her. Look, I'm not saying you're dressing that way to make him lust, but I'm just saying, just so you know, he might have some weaknesses in that area, and it would be an expression of love,
right,
to maybe opt for the more modest outfit.
You are your brother's keeper,
Yeah.
and we are our sister's keeper.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
How, says Holly Hearts, can we help those with mental illnesses who struggle with gender dysphoria? I'm going to just change this question a little bit and just ask about like parents. I don't think we've really kind of directly addressed that.
Yeah.
There's parents who've come up to me in tears because their son thinks she's their daughter, etc.
Yeah.
Or his,
Well, one, I would say to the parents, don't freak out in the first conversation, turn into some debate, some yelling match, some theological, dissertation, telling that they're wrong and that this is just a phase, and you're going to outgrow this and cut that ridiculous stuff out, and like, don't freak out. And some parents are like, oh, great. I mean, that's exactly what I did. Now, how do I do damage control here?
Right.
You could go back to the kid and say, look, I'm sorry I didn't do the best job of listening to you. Can I try again to listen? And you'd be surprised if it's not like, can we try to talk about this again? No, can I try to listen again? I understand that this is really important to you. And because I love you, it's important to me to understand where this is coming from. And then you just start asking questions. Thank you for sharing this with me. I'm sure that was probably really hard to tell me, because you've probably been thinking about this for a long time and afraid that if you tell me that I'm going to reject you. And so thank you for trusting me with this information. And a lot of this is new territory for me. And so please be patient with me as I try to learn where this is coming from and what these terms mean. And so now we're entering into like, okay, let me receive you. Let me see where this is coming from. And this is not to endorse this. It's to say, okay, I want to understand where you're coming from. And then you can start to maybe take a map of their dysphoria. Okay, when did this start happening? What was going on in your life at that time? What triggers your dysphoria? Is it just the clothing, or is it the social expectations of womanhood, or is it the social media? When do you find yourself feeling most dysphoric? And some teens will say, I feel most dysphoric when I'm locked in my own room on a screen. Other person, it's like, no, when I have to dress in formal attire and this really frilly feminine dress, I just feel like, ugh, it's not me. Everybody's kind of got a different story. So let's start listening then. What's the story being told there? Are you being told that if you don't dress that way, that you're not a girl? Well, hey, maybe you don't need to go out and run and buy a pink dress, just because you don't feel comfortable in that and you need to conform to this. So be patient, but then also you might need to unplug them a little bit. And what I mean by this is there was a woman named Dr. Lisa Littman, Planned Parenthood worker, Democrat, pro-choice, all that stuff, came out with a research paper identifying something called rapid onset gender dysphoria. Yeah. And she was just crucified over this thing. And I mean, she was fired, and the Brown University took away the press release for her thing. And she just got beaten to death over this. But all she was doing is pointing out, look, there's some really common features going on with these adolescent females who are just coming out of the woodworks identifying as transgender trans or non-binary, they often come from progressive families. They are spending an insane amount of time on Tumblr, Reddit, YouTube, Instagram with these trans influencers, often on the autistic spectrum, a little bit socially awkward, typically don't have a boyfriend. And then they're at a social setting in a public school, usually, where one girlfriend comes out as non-binary and then trans and then this and then that. And before you know it, they're trans too. And she said there's a social contagion piece that's going on here, kind of like that happened with cutting, kind of what happened with eating disorders before that. This social contagion piece. And a lot of people who didn't resonate with that were like, no, that's not my experience, kind of wrote off all her research without realizing like this is actually happening, a social contagion piece. And so from the parent's perspective, you want to look at, do you even know what's being taught in your kid's school? You might need to change campuses. You might need to move the family. You might need to unplug for a little bit, go on a camping trip, get the kid in 3-dimensional space, spend family dinners together, interact more. And this is going to be more of a marathon than a sprint. And so you don't want to think, okay, what's the perfect word I can say to my kid to convince her she's not trans? No. This is going to be a bit of a hike. It's going to be a bit of a walk. So learn, research, dive into this stuff so you understand the terms that she's saying and what that means to her, and hopefully find a good mental health professional as well that can walk with her in this thing and won't compromise Catholic teaching. But at the same time, understand, okay, this is going to be a bit of a journey together, but we're going to walk with you on it. So kind of hold on to one hand with reality, one hand to your daughter, and don't let go of either hand.
Okay. The Transcendental Catholic says, for a child who is already in a situation where his parents are of the same sex, would a civil union, living as brother and sister, be good for the sake of the child? I am not for civil unions, this person is saying.
I would not tend to say so. And the reason why I would go in that direction is because it's perpetuating an environment that is intrinsically not ordered according to what a family should be. If a father is missing because, let's say my wife and I pass away and I'm no longer there, well, it's a deprivation of a good, but it isn't an intrinsically disordered circumstance. It's just the deprivation of a good. Whereas when we're introducing two males as parental figures over one child, it's not the way that is created to be. And one thing that I always point out when I'm talking to kids about this and debating the issue or whatever is that a man cannot replace a mother. Like an army of 1,000 men cannot take the place of a single mother.
Amen.
It's just not possible. And so every child has a right to their biological parents, but not every adult has a right to possess a child. The children are not rights, they're gifts. And so what's happening is we're superseding the rights of the child with the parents. I have a desire to have a child, that's my right. The children's rights go above that to their parents. And if they don't have both biological parents available, to me, to introduce a second male is not addition, it's more subtraction.
Okay. This local supporter would like to be anonymous and asks, do you agree with Dr. Paul McHughes' characterization of the rise in trans-identifying persons, particularly youth, as a social craze similar to the multiple personality disorder trend in the 80s and 90s? I know you've addressed this somewhat, but if you want to...
No, I do. And in this, if you look at the data, back when like the DSM-5 was written, it was 2013. This, it introduced the topic of gender dysphoria by the name that they gave it in 2013. They show the statistics on how prevalent is this. And so for males, they said the prevalence of gender dysphoria in males is 0.05% to 0.005% to 0.14%, which is like 1 in like 20,000. And then for the females, it was even lower than that, 0.002%, 0.003%, which is like 1 in 50,000 people. Now you look at the numbers coming out of people identifying as trans, and the statistics are anywhere from 0.6% to 3%, which is an astronomical rise of just a decade ago when those statistics were originally released. And so what's going on there is not only more people are identifying as trans, there's this massive inversion of the sex ratio, where it used to be predominantly middle-aged men and boys, and now skyrocketing females of an adolescent. You don't have a lot of middle-aged women coming out, I'm trans. It's just not happening.
Yeah.
It's predominantly adolescent females at this time of, cultural chaos. After Instagram came out, social media, that's typically where we saw this massive spike. And so it is undeniable the social contagion piece is there. If you want to just look at the data of it, go look at research Dr. Lisa Littman, or if you want a more popularized treatment of that, just read Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. It is an one of the best books I read on the subject of the social contagion piece of this. So this is undeniable. It's not a matter of, is this really happening? It's like, this is going on.
Yeah.
There was one school over in England I was reading about that the woman was interviewing the different students about the gender craze going on campus. And there's so many kids identifying as trans, non-binary. And then the woman asked her, how many girls on the campus now identify as lesbian? The student said 0. And I was like, wait a minute,
eh?
Where did they go? There was no room for that anymore. They were now identifying completely out of femaleness.
Sarah Haynes asks, how would you suggest interacting in the workplace with co-workers that promote LGBTQ ideology or are LGBTQ plus friendly? Yeah. I don't know what to do when a coworker wants me to use certain pronouns.
Yeah. No, I mean, this can obviously be an extremely delicate, difficult situation. So what I try to do is try to build a relationship with that person in terms of a friendship so that they know, hey, this person treats me like a human being. We get along, we're in the kitchen together, they're friendly to me or this or that. So you want to build that friendliness so they're like, okay, this person, doesn't harbor any ill will against me. If it comes to the point where it's like, okay, are you going to use my preferred pronoun or not? Are you going to call me they or he or zir? Are you going to do this or are you not? What I would try to say is something like this. You know that I like, and I love you. I care about you as a human being. And I know this subject is really important to you. And I respect that. But I feel that if I were to use that pronoun for you, I'd feel like I'm lying to you. And I feel like I don't want to be dishonest with you. And I just respect you enough to tell you that, I know the world is a big place and it's got a lot of different viewpoints and not everybody sees eye on this, but I think we can still learn a lot from each other. And even though we don't see eye to eye on this, and I'm not going to reject you because of your beliefs on pronouns and gender, and I am hoping that you won't reject me because my viewpoints are different than yours. I hope we can still learn a lot from each other. And maybe if we take that approach, they might see, okay, I'm taking the burden of exclusivity off of me and giving it to you. You can choose to accept me and be inclusive, or you can reject me for my viewpoint. But I'm not going to reject you because our viewpoints are different. And hopefully if we take that tone, they might be able to say, okay, this person clearly doesn't hate me. They have enough respect for me to disagree with me, because disagreement isn't a sign of hatred. It's a sign of respect that I can challenge you on something lovingly. And I think if we try to take that approach, and if it doesn't go well, you could try to avoid the use of pronouns altogether. Possibly that might be an approach in terms of names. And there's different approaches. There isn't a cookie cutter approach to all this stuff. I mean, if I've got a coworker who's using that name, they say, if you use another name, you're dead naming me. That's the title that would be used for their birth name. And I could see how there could be an act of lack of charity of just no, you're Robert. Now I'm going to call you Robert. Meanwhile, the other employees don't even know, what is he talking about? I thought he's a female. There could be a lack of charity there. But I'd approach that differently than if I have a 13-year-old girl who says, my name's Robert now. Okay, well, this needs to be handled a little bit differently. Then I'm okay, well, we're just going to go along and get you a binder and move on with things. It's a case-by-case situation, in my opinion.
Okay, suppose you have a situation where you actually have the boss telling you you need to refer to him as her. Is that ever acceptable in your view?
Well, I don't think so. I think that's coerced speech. And you look at what Dr. Jordan Peterson did up in Canada and standing up to the institution there of no, you can't force me to speak a specific way. I can be a conscious objector of I just won't use pronouns. And that I'll use the person's name, because you'll notice in our conversation, every time I've done your pronoun, it's you, because we're having a personal dialogue. I don't have to hop over to third person pronouns because you're in the room. I can speak to you. And so I would say, okay, well, you can't force me to say specific word. That's speech control. But I can refrain from, if that particular pronoun is a source of distress for my colleague, I don't wish to subject them to any further distress, to Bob or whoever the name is, to any further distress. And I can respect that and avoid that word, but you can't force me to use a word. And in the end, they can't fire all of us, because in my opinion, 99% of the people in the culture really don't buy off on all this stuff. It's just socially expedient to do so. And in terms of economics, I heard a quote once that said, it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. In other words, these corporate executives are not on board with gender theory. They just know if they're not on board with it, they're fired. And so we got a lot of cowards. And so I think we need to speak up and say, hey, we need to defend the rights of individuals who identify as trans to a workplace that has compassion and love and respect without going to the opposite extreme of controlled speech for everybody else. Yeah. It's like the bathroom debate thing. It's like, well, no, you're going to go in your bathroom and you're going to go in your bathroom. It's like, well, wait a minute, time out. Is that the answer? Because like, do you really want a guy who's fully transitioned with surgeries and everything in the boys' bathroom taking a shower while he fully looks female in front of your boys? Is that really what you're arguing? Well, I guess not. Well, then where do you want him to go? It's like, look, he needs to use the bathroom somewhere. We need to learn how to make accommodations to live in the world together. And maybe it means a private restroom or something like that. So we've got to look at it a case-by-case situation.
Aurelius says, does the trans movement rely on a belief in primal
androgyny?
Thank you. Androgyny. That is, that gender is a modification of a fundamentally androgynous human nature.
Yes. In a sense, if you're speaking about assigning people sex at birth, it's treating everybody like they are all hermaphrodites at birth, meaning the genderly ambiguous, like they were all sexually ambiguous creatures, and gender is something we can simply assign to people, or sex you can assign to people. The problem with assigning sex, that whole language, if sex can be assigned, sex can be reassigned. And that's the language that why it's being adopted. And now the term of assigning sex at birth was typically something only given in extreme cases of when you have genital ambiguity in an infant. And you're not sure, is this a boy? Is this a girl? And so in those extreme circumstances, you'd have these team of clinicians that might work together and quote unquote assign the sex at birth. Our best guess is this: they're assigning a sex at birth. So from a clinical perspective, that's where that language came from. And then it was hijacked and now imposed to the entire general population. We're all being assigned sexes. It's like, well, wait a minute. No. I wasn't assigned male any more than I was assigned like type AB blood type. My blood type was not assigned to me by a clinician. It was recognized by a clinician. And so the same way when it comes to our sex isn't something that signs, it's something that already exists in reality. And so this is why there's come a lot of this postmodernism philosophy that like, no, language doesn't describe reality. Language creates reality. And so that's where a lot of this is coming from, of like, I can not only use words to describe what I see, words themselves can sculpt things into existence by the way we change language. And so this is what Judith Butler was behind, a lot of this queering the binary. A lot of it had to do with the use of language. And so that's why people have even hopped on the bandwagon of this and identifying as trans race and trans age and, and that stuff, because they're trying to sculpt reality by harnessing the power of language. Whereas from a Catholic perspective, when human beings speak, we create sound. When God speaks, things come into existence. It's a substantial ontological difference. And so the trans movement is essentially usurping the power of God by thinking that we can create new realities into existence by our speech.
Okay. Wow. Dude, you have done such a deep dive into this, and I'm so grateful on behalf of the rest of the church for you having done this. I mean, that takes a lot of discipline to dig into this. I know for a while when I was speaking primarily on pornography, there would be days I'm like, I'm just done. I'm just so tired of talking about this. Have you got there yet with this? Or
not even close. I mean, because I'm learning so much of this subject. Every single presentation I do and a kid comes up, well, I'm, this or that, and we sit and we just talk and I listen. And so every day I'm learning more, especially in particular from these kids, from the research that's coming out. And, and thanks be to God, like I said, in Western Europe, the pendulum is starting to swing back. And so I think we're a little behind the game here in America, but I think things are going to improve. They might get darker before it gets lighter, but I think on the horizon, there's some hope. And I think the hope is the detransitioners. Yeah. I think there's good things on the way.
Felix says, why are the majority of the public freakouts you see online from transgender people from middle-aged men who have transitioned to female? Sorry, I don't know the terminology.
Part of it could be, well, what do you see online is what they know you're going to click on. It's clickbait. Oh, here's a guy who just looks crazy and he's screaming at this person. Oh, click. Okay, well, what about this well-mannered person wrestling with gender dysphoria who has a thoughtfully, well thought out question for a person on a panel? That's not going to get on 10,000 clicks. You're going to see the crazy stuff. I remember seeing an article once. I don't know if I think it was on Fox News or CNN, where it was like the top 10 stories of 2020 or whatever. And I clicked on it. Okay. And it turned out those were not the most 10 important stories of the year. They were the 10 stories that got the most clicks. And it was, adultery and murder and theft and scandal and abuse. And I'm like, really, that was like the most important 10 things that happened in that year? No, what they're gauging it on is what we click on. And that made me look at media in a whole new way. We don't watch what media shows us. Media shows us what we watch.
How depressing is that? And the heart is a wretched and wicked thing.
We want to see a dumpster fire.
Yeah,
we want to see that. That's going to get the clicks.
That's why Twitter exists.
Yeah, and so that's why we need to unplug a little bit. Yeah. Because if the church spent as much time watching like transgender headlines, is like the amount of time we're investing in that. If we actually spent that time talking to individuals experience gender dysphoria, we would be so far ahead of the game at this point. But no, we're just clicking. We're just watching. We're not listening. We're not turning off the dumb screen and entering into conversations with people. Those are the conversations that need to happen, because these people are not the caricatures that you see online of these crazy, wild, psychotic individuals screaming their brains out and do all this stuff. Yeah, obviously those individuals are there and they have probably a lot of distress going on in their life. But I think even they need to be listened to, because maybe they're screaming because no one will listen to them otherwise.
What's a story maybe you could share with us from an interaction you've had with somebody who identified as trans at one of your talks?
Some of the ones that come out to me the most is like that boy I mentioned, where we started to talk about his family and the ache that he was really having was not to be a girl, but just to be loved. Yeah. I find that to be a common theme. For these girls, I find a lot of, because I'll do the chastity talks and I'll tell the kids afterwards, hey, if you guys want to hang out afterwards, I'll be here for you. Yeah. And gave that invitation at high school in New York, and the kids formed a line 7 hours long.
Wow.
And we had to cut the line off to get to the 5:30 p.m. talk, but they would come out and just pour out their hearts, the addiction, the abortion, the molestation, the cutting, and they would just pour it all out. And, when I spoke at the Sikh conference a few months ago, there's 19,000 college kids there, and I did a breakout on the topic of gender, and many of the college students came up and they started sharing with me their stories. And what struck me is how unique every story was. Like, one guy came to me and he said, yeah, I'm really wrestling with this gender stuff right now. And we just started to kind of walk it back. And he said, yeah, I think it started, with my pornography. He said, I started to stumble upon genres of transgender porn that I never knew even existed. Yeah. And then I found myself kind of like intrigued by what is this? And why am I getting so aroused by this thing that I never sought out in the first place? And maybe I'll going to get more arousal by living it out myself. And so he started dressing up in private of the things in the ways that he was seeing. And so a lot of this was a porn-induced kind of thing that wouldn't have existed before cell phones. Because in order for him to find that genre of porn 20 years ago, you'd have to take a pretty deep dive into some place to find that stuff. Yeah. And now it's on every kid's cell phone. And so that was his story. And so that's why I think it's so important we not take this broad stroke of, it's all social contagion. That's a piece. And trauma is a piece, autism's a piece. Like, there's all these different parts of the puzzle, and everybody's story is unique. And that's why we need to listen in order to help them hear where it's coming from.
I know a lot of people who are watching right now are going to feel exhausted with their own sexual sin. The kind of, what was that rotating door, of like, I'm going to get better, I'm going to go to confession, I feel better, I fell, I go to confession, I feel better, I fell, I'm tempted, I fell. You once shared a story about some Asian priest or Asian brother who dealt with maybe addiction to opioids or something. Could you share that story? Because I found that it applies a lot to people who are exhausted and fed up with their own sin.
A friend of mine is always reading saint books, and I saw him, you reading any good saint books? And he's like, yeah, I'm reading about saints and addictions. I'm like, that's cool, like saints who help people with their addictions. And he said, no, like the addicted saints. And I'm like, I don't remember reading them in catechism class. Who were they? And he said, well, check out this guy, Saint Mark Zhicheng Zhang from China. This guy was a husband, a father, a doctor, got a stomach ailment, and so he treated himself with a drug that was used at that time, which is opium, and the illness went away, but then a drug addiction remained in its place. So he goes to confession, hey, Father, forgive me, I've become addicted to, this drug. And so the priest gave him absolution, some pastoral advice, and he went away, and he went back to the drugs, and then he went back to confession. Addiction, confession. Sound familiar? And the priest eventually said to him, now, because you keep going back to the drugs, it tells me you're not really sorry. And so I would ask you to no longer come back to confession until you've overcome this, and don't receive Holy Communion anymore. And so the priest just didn't know how to respond to this as a mental illness, an addiction, all that, which is obviously really bad pastoral advice to give, but Mark obeyed him, and he still went to mass with his family, and he was still an upstanding doctor, but secretly in the shadows struggling with this. And then eventually it became known, and there was shame there. And a month went by, no sacraments. It became a year, 10, 20, 30 years.
What's his name again?
Saint Mark Zhi, which is Xi Cheng Zhang, which I think Jiang. So you can just spell that. So Saint Mark Zhi
Shang Zhang. Thursday, I can pull it up. So yeah, do just St. Mark and then XI, and they'll come up Opium Addict.
I'll slack it to you.
And so like 30 years go by, and he's at the point now just praying, God, just make me a martyr. I can't see any way I'm going to get to heaven. And so what happened is God answered his prayer for martyrdom, and the Boxer Rebellion came into China, and they started rounding up and executing Christians. And so he and 9 members of his family were dragged off to the place of torture and death. And his grandson said to him, like, where are we going? And Mark said, we're going home. And they brought him to the place of torture, and they started cutting off all the heads of the members of his family. And he begged the torturers to kill him last so that no one in the family would have to die without him being by their side to encourage them to be faithful to the end. And one by one, they cut off the heads of everybody in his family until at last he was beheaded as he was singing the litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And now he's a canonized saint who died addicted to opium, which is like proof that the saint is the one who doesn't have a mess in their life. They're the one who gives their mess utterly to Jesus Christ. And that's why like good priests, the spiritual direction will say, the number one thing the devil wants you to do after sin is to lose your peace. Yeah. Do not lose your peace. Because it's a sign of pride. Like, I'm so astonished I would screw up. Like, I thought I was, at least venerable material here. And now here I am messing up.
That's just sales, right?
Yeah, keep your peace after a fall.
I like to remind myself and other people that we are a delight to Jesus. And we find that so hard to believe that he loves us, that he even likes us, because we often don't like ourselves.
Yeah.
And even our sin, when we repent of it, is delightful to Jesus, because surely it's a delightful thing for the Savior to save.
No, and God lets us stumble. I mean, like an hour ago, we were just discussing the disorders of sexual development, and I botched CIIS with CAH. And I'm like, like I know that stuff back and forth. I totally flopped it. And God's like, but that's good. Humility's good for you.
It's good that Matt's going to refuse to edit that out of the video.
You got all your answers and stuff, and I let you stumble because it's so good for you. Receive that and be at peace. Don't get all worked up of like, dang, it would have been airtight if I had messed up. Like, no, you give that to me too. You give that to me. And so he does the same thing with our faults and sins. Like he lets us stumble because otherwise we'll actually think we're independent.
Yep.
Like that's why like chastity is not like growing in strength. It's just growing in awareness of your weakness.
Yeah.
Of just like, oh, wow, like I can do this. I can walk, then you trip. And then like, well, maybe I need to crawl. Like now I'm exhausted from crawling. It's like, well, maybe I need to just be picked up and can you just carry me? And that's the ascent of the spiritual life is becoming more and more childlike, I think.
Yeah, amen. Lars says, in dealing with gender ideology advocates or proponents, but not those who suffer from dysphoria, is there a sufficient argument that doesn't rely on creationism? The problem being that many people who aren't religious don't want to hear the arguments that rely on a religious worldview. How do you get atheists from point A to point B on this issue?
Well, maybe have a conversation with Richard Dawkins. I mean, here's a guy, obviously not a profound theist, who says, no, it is male or female, and that is it. This is not a left or right issue. I mean, I think a lot of people in the trans activist community try to paint this as like, oh, you've got the right-wing, conservative, transphobic, hate-monging bigots over there, and then you have the open-minded people who care about other human beings on this side. It's like, well, not really. I mean, there's a lot of people, even in the LGBT community who are like, no, this is not leading in a good direction. I mean, you just look at what's happening. Like, okay, do I have to use a person's preferred pronoun? Well, what about a woman who's been sexually assaulted and she has to testify in court against the man who raped her and identifies as a woman? Are you going to force that sexual assault victim to refer to her own rapist as she on the stand? Are you going to do that to that woman? You are violating that woman's rights as if she has not been violated enough. And then you look at what's going on over in England, like, okay, you want this transgender ideology? Let's take it all the way. I mean, a guy in just Scotland 2 weeks ago just got arrested for rape. He was held on trial, but by the time he got to trial, he identified as gender fluid and wants to be put in a female prison. So they put the rapist in the female prison. Well, you know what's going on there now. Almost every state in America has men in female prisons who identify as female. We're getting pregnancies, sexual assaults. Even in England, the way they categorize crimes is now based on gender identity. And so what that means, believe it or not, the majority of registered sex offenders that are female in England are biological males. The majority of female sex offenders. And you read the news headlines, woman caught with stash of pornography, woman rapes 3 children, woman this, woman that. It's all based on gender identity.
Am I right in thinking that our tax dollars are going to, in some instances, pay for people's sex change surgeries in prisons?
I'm not sure. I don't want to speak out of turn, but there is legislation underway that these things need to be covered as comprehensive health care. I've even seen one, I think the guy was, I don't know if he's a mayor of somewhere in California or someone that worked in the Department of Health over there, referred to double mastectomies as correcting defects. That basically breasts are birth defects if you don't like them, and then it needs to be covered under comprehensive health insurance. And so it's like, so to people saying, hey, this is going to go great, like, well, let's look how it's going around the world. I mean, USA Powerlifting just lost a lawsuit like 2 weeks ago where they now are being forced to allow men to compete in women's powerlifting events if they identify as female, which means like, I mean, I can deadlift, my record is 415 pounds. So I could probably take like the Ohio State women's deadlifting record, perhaps. Like, and if I sincerely identified as trans, that's what it's allowing. It's just shattering women's sports. And so you've got women who are not conservative Christians saying, look, this is the death of women's sports. Because what's going on now, I mean, just globally with this, I mean, you look at like mixed martial arts, there's men identifying as women that are
pounding the crap
just knocking unconscious women. But like in mixed martial arts, like if you miss your weight cut by 8 ounces for a championship bout, you are ineligible to win the title. So you can be a 265 pound man, but if you come in to cut weight and you are 265.9 ounces, you are disqualified from winning the championship belt because you missed weight by more than half of a pound. That's how rigid they are to make sure that this thing is fair.
Yeah.
But now we have men entering into women's mixed martial arts who identify as female, and they're like, we can't say anything there. It's like we've become so open-minded, our brains are falling out.
Mm-hmm. What are some things you'd like to see Catholics stop saying or stop doing in this discussion?
Stop making a caricature of people who experience gender dysphoria as that those are just those crazy screaming lunatics I saw on
anime shirt wearing.
Yep, that's who they are. No, you know who they are? They're sitting next to you on Sunday Mass and you didn't even know it. They're in that marriage. That's the husband over there holding this kid's hands up to communion, and he's wrestling with gender dysphoria, and you didn't know it because what's he going to tell you? That he's been wrestling with this since he was a kid? No, he's not. He's doing his best just to keep it together and hold his family together while trying to be his authentic self and feeling torn in 2 different directions. Like these are people that are already in the church, but they feel invisible. And so I think what we need to say to them is like, we see you and we know you didn't choose this. This isn't like I woke up, it's Thursday, I'd like to do these things today. You're not a walking abomination to God. You're not constantly incurring the displeasure and wrath of God because you experience gender dysphoria. In fact, he's the only one who's been with you in those dark nights when you didn't even understand yourself and you felt like nobody would understand you in your family, in your church, in your community, and you're wrestling and you're wondering, is life even worth living? He was the only one that was accompanying you with that. And the moment you thought that he was gone and he had forsaken you, only he knows the suffering that you're going through. And so helping them to understand that we want to be able to see you. The church is a place where you can explore these issues and try to navigate through this. And yeah, it's going to be a little messy. We have a lot to learn as a church on this. We do. Yes, we have ages of ancient wisdom that are priceless and will never change. But in terms of the pastoral accompaniment for individuals who wrestle with gender dysphoria, we got a lot to learn. It's like the same-sex attraction thing like 20 years ago. I look at the way we addressed that 20 years ago, and it's like it's like nails on a chalkboard of how much we had to learn to sculpt our language without compromising orthodoxy,
of course,
to be able to speak into this issue. And right now, it's puberty in a sense. Like our voices are cracking. It's awkward. It's gangly. It's going to be a little clunky. I mean, you write a book like this and I want to edit it 8 minutes later because it's like the language shifts so quickly. But we just got to say, hey, look, we're in this together. Church loves you. God loves you. This is your home. And I'm going to walk with you. I'm not going to guarantee I'm going to understand it all. I won't promise to agree with it all, but I'll walk with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they want more than anything.
What are some good ministries out there helping people? So, okay, before I ask that question, you're talking about on one side, don't be characterizing people, etc. What about on the other side where you've got people like Father James Martin creating a ton of confusion and the German bishops and things like that? Like, how does our compassion... we want to have compassion and truth. So you've just talked about needing compassion. What about those who have compassion and no truth?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, what you're doing there, I mean, if you've got a ministry, I mean, God bless Father James Martin, but he is not building bridges. He's building a dock. he's essentially constructing 50% of a bridge. In other words, come on in, welcome, here's the door, coming on in. Okay, it's almost like when a woman is caught in an act of adultery, Jesus doesn't just say, does no one condemn you? Neither do I condemn you. Let's go on to the next chapter of the Gospel of John. No. He says, and do not go and sin no more. And I'm not saying gender dysphoria is a sin, because it's not. What we're talking about here is it's not enough to just welcome them in. We're welcoming them into an experience with Christ who knows that none of us are perfectly formed, that we all have our brokenness when it comes to our own sexual identity of what does it mean for Jason and Matt to be men? Am I really living that out as God wants me to be? Or are there some ways that I have some own brokenness and my own sexuality? We're all in this together. Like I say, the church isn't a museum of saints, it's a hospital for sinners. And so I think when it comes to folks like Father James Martin, the analogy he gives of building a bridge, it's only half constructed. You're welcoming them in, but you're not calling them to this deeper conversion when it comes to homosexuality, of chastity, and what does that look like? And so I think we need to learn how to interact with these individuals and welcome them. But okay, what does the transformative power of the gospel look like in that person's life? It doesn't necessarily mean the dysphoria is going to go away. Sometimes it does. 80 to 95% of the time, at least for the kids, they'll naturally come to identify with their biological sex. 80 to 95% of the time. Studies are very clear on that one. When you put them on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, that starts to go down for reasons we already discussed. But for some people, it doesn't go away. But to me, it's not a sign that you're not loved by God or that you're less holy because you're wrestling with gender dysphoria. It's kind of like same-sex attractions. Like, if our holiness is defined by our attractions, we're all in a mess. Because what happened to me when I fly home tonight out of the Pittsburgh airport and I see some stunningly beautiful woman who's not my wife? Is that my identity? I'm attracted to a woman who's not my wife. Is that my identity? No, just keep on walking. Thank God for making her beautiful. Just keep on walking. My attractions are not my identity. And in the same respect, if you have gender dysphoria, a mental illness is not your identity. Don't identify yourself by that. It's maybe a page in your book, but it's not the cover story. And so we all have these things of different vices and virtues and strengths. And that's not the whole story about you. You got gifts too. You got talents. You have a charism that was entrusted to you. I mean, I remember when we met, back in England 20 years ago, and, we fostered that friendship. I just saw this thing in you. You had this it thing, this charism that would be used for the building up of the church. I could just see it in you, and I think we've got to help them to see in themselves that God's given them particular gifts. And if they make their whole life the gender dysphoria topic, the whole body becomes the target of intervention, and it ends up missing them out on the opportunity to develop strategies to address core needs that might even need clinical attention, because the body gets all the attention. I got to change that part. But it becomes this endless set of false summits. I did this and it's still not the end. I did this and that's at the end. It's exhausting. And so we can understand if a person's gone through the first stage of transitioning all the way to last, it could be a harrowing experience to look back at all the ground that's been covered. And how do I even go back to that? Where do I even land after all this stuff?
That'd be a great title, a series of false summits. That'd be a great title for a book. So who's doing this well then, right now? What ministry would you point people to, or ministries? You're I think that maybe you haven't researched all of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got Eden Invitation, which is a ministry in the church focused more on same-sex attractions, but they are addressing this. And, one of the themes that they talk about is it's beyond this LGBT paradigm. In other words, of our initials are not our identity. Our identity is rooted in Christ. And so they're beginning to reach more into that area of ministry. Courage may do some work in this area. Personedandidentity.com, which I'd mentioned before, isn't so much ministering to the person, but it has content for the families. There are a lot of ministries out there, not many Catholic. There are many that are secular, that are some that are Christian-based. If you go to chastity.com/gender, we've got links to all of these. And we can't endorse everything that everybody is promoting on all of those things, but the parents going through this are not alone. There's so many parents what the heck do I do? Because it's what they're being told is this suicide narrative that if you don't, walk along with your kid in transitioning, your kid's going to commit suicide. But what they don't tell them is after the surgery is over, the suicide rate climbs to 19 times higher than the general population. And if you isolate out the girls to the girl to boy transition, 40 times higher suicide rate after the transitioning surgeries. And so the parents are sold this narrative, if you don't go along, your kid's going to commit suicide. That's pretty powerful stuff. When it's here's your option, living daughter or dead son, make your pick. Right. But you look at the data and it's not true at all. In fact, the girls are more likely to self-harm after going on puberty blockers than beforehand. Like it's not addressing these core needs. And then the surgeries are over and it's like, wait a minute, the problems are still there. And they were never really resolved. And so for the parents, you got to understand, you're not alone in this. There's a lot of parents who are out there fighting good legal battles and facing lawsuits, suing, doing all this stuff. They're changing the school boards. They're getting involved in all these different roles in society. Say, we will not allow this stuff to seep into our schools. And it's a mess and people are getting fired and it's a battle, but you're not the only one in the trenches. Yeah. And we've got to collectively step in there, not as an act of oppression against trans individuals, but in solidarity for love of them, because if you love someone, you don't deny them the truth.
We've talked about people who quote unquote transition and how do they reconcile that if they change their mind and they want to detransition, and God bless them. Golly, I just thought about this category of people. What about the parents that went along with the bad advice that the psychologist gave, or maybe even encouraged their child to go down this route? And maybe their child is, from outward appearances, okay with this new lifestyle. Yeah. How does the parent repent of this? And then how does the parent act towards their child?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to have mercy on yourself as a parent, and what I mean by that is you probably were the subject of a lot of misinformation, of thinking what was best for your kid. And you could have and should have perhaps done a better job of forming your intellect to know, hey, this is not the best route to go. But I'm willing to bet that you were at least motivated at a core level of I would just want to protect my kid. And if it means having to go through this stuff, I mean, I've watched interviews with the moms of, and actually seen them injecting their kids' thighs with these cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and this, that, and the parents are in tears while it's going on. And they're just sitting, and you can just see them in the doctor's office just being like, this is not the plan that I had for my son. This is not the plan I had for my daughter. But if this is what I got to do to keep this kid alive, then because you want to trust your doctor, you want to trust the psychologist. And if you go to the experts and they're saying, oh, this is the best way to keep them safe. And you've got President Joe Biden to say, parents, the best thing you can do for the health and safety of your kid is to affirm their identity. That's President Joe Biden. And you got adults who are like, okay, I got to trust the pediatrician. I got to trust the endocrinologist. And they're all saying this. Okay. And then it all hits the fan and it's like, what the heck is going on? And I've listened to some of the audio conversations. I remember one guy, as a female, detransitioned and then called up her therapist over the phone and left, I don't know if it was a voicemail or what, but she recorded her conversation screaming at this woman. How could you let me do this? You let me dance in my delusion and you would not speak the truth to me. Did you even study the effects of this? And the woman was like, no. Did you see what happened long-term on this? Did you do this? No. Well, what were you telling me? Well, I just wanted you to be your authentic self, just parroting these party lines. And so if you're a mental health professional, endocrinologist, you're a parent, and you've maybe drank the Kool-Aid and you're realizing, whoa, we need your voice. Yeah. We need your voice. We need you to speak up and say, look, I went down that road too. And this is why I want to dissuade other parents from thinking that this is the answer. These kids need to be affirmed in their identity, but their identity is not something other than their biological sex. That's why this language has been hijacked, that conversion therapy is helping a child to bring their mind in alignment with their body. But affirmative care is giving them cross-sex hormones to become a gender other than their biological sex. It's like Ryan Anderson, it's an Orwellian abuse of language, of the inversion of truth. And so I think these people, hey, admit, repent, seek forgiveness of God that you made these decisions and let this thing happen, but now you speak up. We need your voice. There's so many young people now just starting this whole process and they need the voices of them. It's almost like you look on your app and you see, oh, there's a 15-car pileup a quarter mile ahead, with icy conditions. Should I keep my pedal to the metal at 60 miles an hour? Maybe I want to start to pump the brakes here a little bit. We already see the buildup that's happened in Western Europe, and that tsunami is about to hit the shores here.
What's it going to look like as the tide turns? Not the tsunami, but as the tide turns, what do you just kind of envision culturally? How will this begin to change?
I mean, God willing, I tend to be more of an optimistic kind of person, but
you need it for your job.
Like a renaissance of understanding of masculinity and femininity. A broadening of our understanding of what those things mean. Because to me, the answer isn't to erase sexual differences, or change one's gender, or sexual identity. It's more to have a broader understanding. Like, hey, you can be fully male and and be into interior decorating. You're still totally a guy. You can be a woman like Sister Dieter Burns, in a Colonel in the United States Army and still mother through that occupation. So we need to rediscover ourselves as a bit. And this has been a painful way to do that. I mean, it was Vatican II that said, when God is forgotten, the creature itself grows unintelligible. And so what it means is if we lose sight of supernatural realities, it'll come to the point where we can't even see natural realities. And if we don't even know what it means to be male and female, and we miss that thing, I mean, the error that will flow from that will be compounded exponentially, like your kid getting a long division problem wrong, and you go back to the beginning, oh, you missed that one digit. And so I think we're needing to rediscover ourselves, and hopefully we'll see a renaissance of the theology of the body. And hey, I don't know when the dawn is coming. I mean, it might be a pretty long night. It might get pretty dark. People might go to jail, lose some jobs, but for such a time as this, we should praise God that he let us live during this moment of Christian civilization. Important.
And of course, we're dangerously close to quoting Gandalf to Frodo when he says it's not for us to ask. All that's for us to figure out is what to do with the times that have been given us.
Because when I did a talk at Seek, I was talking about the gates of hell not prevailing against the church, and just pointing out everyone reads that backwards. That you think it's the gates of hell attacking the church, but the gate is a defensive structure. No one gets attacked by a gate. It's the church that's imposing its force upon the gate of hell, and the gates of hell are not going to be able to prevail or hold back the weight of the church. And so it's the church that's marching forward in truth and in glory. The victory is already set in all eternity. And so quit thinking like, oh, the church is under attack. Church is under attack. It's like, oh, cut it out. It's like thinking like if you throw like a flashlight at a Tyrannosaurus Rex, oh, the dinosaur's under attack. It's like, no. Yeah, we're going to get attacked. I mean, I did a talk on gender in Alaska. Someone spray painted phallic symbols of graffiti all over the church as an act of vandalism before the talk. Priest took it in stride. He said, you know what? He said, in anticipation of Jason coming to the parish, I had commissioned some frescoes to be painted for the parish, and they didn't turn out quite as I had hoped. So we'll have the Knights of Columbus paint those over. So don't get worried about that. But to me, it's just like, you're just like throwing rocks, but it's like the church is going to win.
It is so important that we keep that hope, isn't it?
Oh yeah, because you can get so discouraged online just watching all these doom and gloom, hell, is going to win kind of stuff against the church, because it's a mess. It is. It's a mess right now. But God wins.
Also, I mean, our Lord says, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? And so we have reason to think that the faith will diminish and the darkness will grow before the second coming.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's a Christian teaching that things are not going to get better and better and better until the end, and then he comes once we've got it all together.
Right.
That's not what's in the catechism.
Yeah, more and more in my own life, I'm realizing that when I invest emotional energy into things that I have no control or authority over, I then rob myself and my loved ones of the authority that I ought to have.
Yeah.
And so just pulling away from refreshing daily Eyea or listening to Ben Shapiro, or not that there's anything wrong with those fellas. I'm glad they exist and are doing what they're doing. But it's like, gosh, how long can you keep your head in that toilet bowl, whereas you're not actually affecting any change by viewing it? I mean, I think you feel less alone when you listen to Matt Walsh, and there's virtue in that. It's nice to feel less alone, especially if you've just been listening to Disney and your university professor.
Yeah.
But at some point, kind of detaching from that and then reading the Word of God and investing in my family. And one thing that I do now is I leave my phone and computer at the office at night, and then go home, because I find I don't have the self-control to moderate my phone use if it's with me.
I was talking to a husband, and he and I were, this is about a year and a half ago, when a lot of stuff was going on with Pachamama and Pope Francis, all this like crazy stuff. And, we'd be getting on each day and kind of seeing the updates of all this stuff, like what's Pope Francis doing now? And all of us, the guys, without even talking to each other, just quit listening to that stuff, quit paying attention to it, because it was like, okay, where's my spirit after I listen to that? Am I a better husband? Am I a better father after that? Like, what if I knew all of the details of all of the conspiracy theories inside the church, the deepest rabbit holes of masonry and this? They're like, what if I knew all that stuff is all brought to light? What would I do with that information? Like nothing? Like, oh, okay. Like, now what do I do? Oh, I want to go to my kid's baseball game this afternoon. Like, what if I spent all that time listening to an audiobook on how to be a better dad to my teenage daughter? That would probably be a better investment of my time. And so I'm not saying to put your head in the sand from all the stuff going on in the world, but definitely, pull it out sometimes.
But also don't put it in a soiled toilet.
Yeah, and just sit there thinking like, oh, the more bad information I know, it's almost like you want a sense of control. over your future instead of an abandonment to divine providence of just like, you know what, I don't need to know everything going on in the church. I'm going to pray for the church, because if people prayed for Pope Francis as much as they talk about Pope Francis, I think that would be a better investment. But there needs to be a both and. There needs to be a balance. But I really concur with what you're saying with how we binge on all the bad news, and we just need to unplug and read True Devotion to Mary and read Introduction to the Devout Life and The Way, and you'll find yourself and your family is much better off, and so will the church be. I think the devil wants to distract you with that stuff because of how much of your life he can eat up with anxiety and this and that. It's like, wow, that was 2 hours a day he could have spent Eucharistic adoration or doing this or that, and now he didn't because he was too busy chasing after the next scandal in the church.
Yeah, I was reading Romans, I think 2 today, where he talks about, like, do you think that because you judge, you'll be free of judgment when you do the same thing, that sort of thing. Yeah. And maybe that is what we have in us. Like, if there's people out there worse than us that we can keep looking at, then maybe I'll somehow feel more secure as opposed to taking my salvation from Christ.
That's why the gossip magazines and TMZ are so powerful and alluring to people, because it's like, wow, those people's lives are really dysfunctional. Like, what a mess. Then you look at your own, like, I'm doing pretty good compared to those people. Because it's like, you know, if you surround yourself with people who aren't living a godly life, you'll typically see their faults and your virtues. But then if you hang out with people who are living a godly life, you see their virtues and your faults, and then you make a lot more progress.
Yeah, here's what I was reading. Therefore, you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges, for in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The fact, like, if you make it, I think, and Thomas Aquinas says this in his commentary on Romans, that when you make a judgment, you're showing that you know the law. Yeah. So you can't claim ignorance. Yeah. And you do the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the less you pay attention to your own sins, the more interested you become in the sins of others.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you personally find the, like, technology a struggle? Like, just personally, like I do with my phone and stuff and putting it away? And
I did XS90 a while back, and the one thing I didn't tell the kids I was doing it or anything, and then they just noticed it was just quieter. You know, that, you know, when Dad was having a snack in the kitchen, ESPN wasn't playing the latest dunk by Ja Morant. Like, I just wasn't plugged in, and it was just a quieter place, and I was just more present. And so I've definitely tried, like, this Lent. I mean, I got rid of social media except to use it for ministry or whatever, but I'm not scrolling around and looking at this and that. I'm just, and it's just good. It's always good to unplug. Where I was like, wow, you almost realize how little you needed that in the first place.
Rest takes effort. Mm-hmm. Like, rest can be exhausting to get to. Yeah. It's not the same as dissociating. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of times like a challenge I give to people is don't use social media lying down. If you want to use it standing up. and then, but when you lay down, you're not allowed to use it, because you're going to use it 10 times as long if you just sit there and just doom scrolling or whatever forever. But if you're standing up, you quickly realize what a waste of time this is. And so if you're going to use it, because what happens is it becomes like a devotional. Yeah. It's just a nightly devotional. I need to click this, and I need to check this, and I need to check that. And it's a false devotion. And so use it, but don't be used by it.
I want to do a shout out for Covenant Eyes as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a link that Ryan sent you. I forget. It'll give you the promo code.
Oh, yeah. And we were supposed to do that when we started streaming. Yeah, no. Also, it's 12:35.
Oh, yeah. We'll wrap up. If you could put that link in the description. But people should seriously consider getting Covenant Eyes. It's the best filtering and accountability software on the web. It doesn't just block the bad stuff. It gives you, let's say as the parent, a report of where your children go online. And I just think about how my life would be different if when I was a teenager, if I was a teenager and my dad said to me, hey, I saw that, and not even pornography. If he said, I saw that you were on ESPN or whatever, you'd be like, ugh. Okay,
what else will he see?
People are seeing this stuff. You know, what happens online is not less real than what happens offline. And I'll do that with my kids. You know, I'm like, hey, I noticed, were you playing a game of chess? Yeah. Because here's the other thing with Covenant Eyes, it takes screenshots of what you're viewing, and it can determine whether or not something might be pornographic and sends an extremely blurred image to your computer.
Yeah, and you can de-blur it if you want to say, okay, is that what I think it is? Oh, good, it's not. You know, so.
But I think what's good about Covenant Eyes is it kind of it trains your children in responsible internet use. It's I mean, I'm increasingly open to the argument that we could throw our children in a bunker and just ignore the world while it burns. I'm joking. But I do think it's perhaps more mature to sort of say, okay, how do I help my children navigate the internet landscape? And I think that's where Covenant Eyes comes in. What do you?
Yeah, because it's a relational tool more than just a technological AI tool. Because a lot of people just want to set it and forget it. Oh, I got the filter. We're good. It's like, no. This is supposed to foster conversation. Yeah. And so that's the idea behind this. And it's not like, okay, we're going to know what you're looking at online. It's like, well, no, you can know what I'm looking at online too. Yeah. Because the idea that I have with my phone is that there's, the little screen mirroring button. I can click that and my cell phone shows up on the living room TV. I want to live like that's always on. So that at any moment, whatever I'm looking at my screen could just be broadcasted to the entire family. Yeah. And a kid can take, if I know that any day of the week, if my kid wants to ask for my cell phone, Dad, can I use your phone to do a calculator? Here you go. They know. I just hand it to whatever. Oh, you need to use it. You want to take a picture of this. You want to text your friend. Yeah. Boom, boom, boom. There's just this availability.
It's not a secret dark place.
like go look. You're not going to find anything. And it's just like, wow, Dad is so free with his phone with us. Yep. I guess I need to have the same type of freedom in handing it over to him anytime he asks as well. And so it has to be a mutual thing. Otherwise, it's like Big Brother staring on you, and they're just going to try to find new ways to get around the next filter. But that's where Covenant is great. It builds that relationship opportunity.
Yeah, I'm terrible at remembering promo codes. Is it Matt Fradd or Fradd? Try both. If you go to covenanteyes.com right now.
covenanteyes.com/Fradd1.
Like the number one?
Yep.
Go there. We'll put a link in the description and you'll get 30 days for free when you try it out. And then you can decide if you want to keep it after that. Covenant Eyes. Man, it's good.
Good stuff.
All right, well, we should probably wrap up and get you to this talk so you can speak to my son about porn and stuff.
Yeah, well, since we're live, we'll ask all the viewers, please pray.
Yeah,
we're just driving to do a high school assembly here in 30 minutes. A couple hundred high school kids coming to the gym. We'll do an hour-and-a-half long chastity talk for all of them. So
let's do that right now. I'd love to just offer a Hail Mary. We've got almost 500 people watching. So if all of us could offer a Hail Mary together for Jason and all those that he's about to speak to, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Now look, I said that we were going to put that link up. So if you're just joining the live stream, I'm going to buy 200 and... How many am I buying? 250?
250,000 copies.
Bloody heck.
250,000 copies.
So I'm going to buy 250 copies of this book, and I'm going to... And what we're going to... So the reason I'm not going to announce it now is I just want to make sure we've got the link right and But I'll pin that link to the top of this video, and I'll explain how to get a free copy of this book. We just ask that you please just buy one. And that you let this book collect souls, not dust.
Yeah.
So read it and then give it away.
And then if they want more, they can get them in bulk at like $5 a piece.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's not just this book you have. We have to
everything.
That book Forged that you and I did together.
Yeah.
That a lot of people have said that's been really helpful to them.
Yeah, we give it out at every high school assembly to the boys.
Is it the link you posted on Locals?
Yeah. Yeah. But then I also talk about the promo code in there. But don't announce it yet because I don't want to screw it up. But there's a promo code that I talk about in Logos. So today, do you have those books to give away?
Oh, yeah. Every assembly, we give away hundreds of them to the high school kids.
Thank you for being you, Jason Everett. Fantastic.
No one's going to buy them anyway. I have to give them away. So.
I don't think that's true. Yeah, I want to talk about that book real quick, though. It's called Forged. This is something... You did the bulk of this, not me. And I'm glad for that.
I just used you for your looks, so...
Yeah. Well, it was a little book I wrote for Lifeteen, remember?
Okay. Yeah, initially.
You remember this? So I wrote a book for Lifeteen, and Lifeteen were going to get rid of it. They were kind of not publishing anymore because people don't look at porn anymore.
Yeah.
And you took all of that text and then you forged it into this 33-day exercise.
Yeah, and then we created free videos. So you text on day one to join, text the word forged to 66866, and then every day for 33 days, day one is me, then you, we got Father Mike Schmitz, Father Jacques Philippe. I mean, we've got all these
Sister
amazing, Sister Miriam, Mother Miriam, just so many different people from not only like psychology, but spirituality, theology, pastoral, like to really get to the roots of this stuff and find healing and freedom. So that's the idea.
That's bloody fantastic.
And guys are supposed to do it together too. Don't just go Lone Ranger. Find a group of guys. And
that's why you sell them in 2-packs, right?
We will not sell one at a time. We want to force you into fellowship.
That's wonderful. All right. So please, everybody, go check out chastity.com. Jason has fantastic resources over there, books, CDs. Have you given a talk on transgenderism that's been recorded yet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's on YouTube. My Seek talk is there. Just go to...
we are going to link to that.
Yeah. Just go to chastity.com go to youtube.com/Jason Evert. And the talk I gave there, it's just a 30-minute presentation, but yeah, we're giving it at universities all over the country now and parishes. Every single week we're getting requests for it. So
God bless. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Do us a favor. Like, thumbs up, subscribe before this channel gets taken down by YouTube, which probably will happen after today's video. And so if you would like to, please follow us over on Rumble, and please follow us over at mattfradd.locals.com so that if YouTube does take us down, it would be nice to be able to still speak to you. Cool?
Yeah.
Bye.